Hi guys. Tonight we're standing on the top of a castle wall in the middle of a winter that makes your teeth ache just from the thought of it. Imagine the stone beneath your boots, slick with frost. The kind that glitters under a pale moonlight but feels more like ice against your skin. The air is so sharp you could almost break it in two, and every breath you take escapes as a little ghostly cloud, vanishing before your eyes. You shift from foot to foot, trying to keep some feeling in your toes, though the leather of your boots has already stiffened like frozen bark. You want to believe this fortress will keep you safe, but the irony is that it's not the arrows, swords, or boiling oil that might finish you tonight, it's the cold. You probably won't survive this if you don't get creative. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop a comment with where you are in the world and what time it is for you. I always love to see how far these little stories travel. Now, dim the lights. You press your palm against the battlement's edge. The chill bites back, seeping into your bones faster than you can pull away. That's the first lesson medieval soldiers discovered the hard way. Stone is unforgiving in winter. Unlike wood, which has a softer, more insulating quality, stone bleeds away heat like a thief. Castles were masterpieces of defense, but comfort? Not so much. Thick walls kept out arrows, but they also trapped dampness, drafts, and the kind of cold that lingers long after the sun goes down. A mainstream fact about these fortresses is that most were built with defensive priorities in mind, not living conditions. They were machines of war, carved from granite or limestone, towering with battlements, moats, and murder holes. But soldiers sleeping in the garrison found themselves at the mercy of a design that valued survival from siege rather than cozy nights. One chronicler in the 13th century remarked bluntly that the stones are colder than the hearts of our enemies. It sounds poetic, but when you're shivering at 3 in the morning, it feels like bitter truth. Still, you adapt. You start pacing the wall walk, the long, narrow path running along the top of the curtain wall. Every guard who came before you did the same, heels clicking against stone, rhythmically keeping time with their numb limbs. It's partly duty, partly desperation. If you stop moving, you freeze. The watchfires down below burn low, but their warmth doesn't reach you. Only your own movement creates enough heat to keep your muscles from locking up. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some garrisons had a little trick when the frost was especially bad. They would fill their mouths with pebbles, not to eat, of course, but to keep themselves salivating while they paced. The constant swallowing gave the illusion of warmth and kept throats from feeling as parched in the frozen night air. It sounds absurd now, but when your lips are cracking and the wind cuts like knives, any ritual feels like salvation. You pull your cloak tighter, wool against linen, linen against skin, layer after layer like an onion. Yet still, the cold sneaks through the seams. You glance toward the courtyard where the soldiers not on watch huddle together, burrowed under shared blankets, muttering in their sleep. Their breath rises in a foggy haze above them, like steam from a cauldron. You envy them, but even they aren't comfortable, just marginally less miserable than you are. Historians still argue whether medieval castles were truly as unbearable in winter as the chronicles suggest, or if the image has been exaggerated over time to highlight the suffering of soldiers. After all, people in the Middle Ages were far more accustomed to cold than most of us are today. No central heating, no double glazing, no thermostats to turn up when the frost crept in. Their threshold for discomfort might have been higher. And yet, it's hard to imagine anyone adjusting completely to nights where even the ink in your inkwell froze solid. The soundscape of this night is minimal. The crunch of your boots, the occasional hoot of an owl, the groan of timbers shifting inside the keep. Far off, the forest rustles with unseen creatures, perhaps a wolf padding through snow, ears pricked at the smell of human flesh up on the walls. That possibility makes you clutch your spear a little tighter, though deep down you know the cold is the greater predator here. The smell is one of damp stone, faint smoke, and the acrid tang of old torch resin. The torches sputter as the wind whips across the battlements, their light more nervous than steady. Each flicker makes the shadows jump, so even in the stillness, you feel like you're not alone. Perhaps it's superstition, perhaps it's exhaustion, but plenty of soldiers believed the cold carried spirits with it, phantoms drifting in from the dark woods or the graves beyond the chapel. Whispered tales said they rode the winter winds, pressing icy hands against the living. You shiver, and not just from the temperature. Your fingers are numb now, stiff on the wooden shaft of your weapon. You blow hot breath into your hands, rub them together, and tuck them beneath your arms. It helps, but only briefly. The body is a stubborn furnace that refuses to quit, but the castle is an even more stubborn freezer, stripping away your heat bit by bit. And yet, night after night, soldiers endured this because if you deserted your post, the punishment was often harsher than frostbite. Better to risk a frozen toe than a whipping, or worse, a hanging. You pause and lean over the parapet, peering at the world beyond. Snow blankets the fields, glowing faintly under starlight. The village huts lie silent, roofs caked with frost, smoke trickling faintly from a chimney or two where peasants cling to their own survival rituals. In some odd way, you feel kinship with them. Whether castle soldier or farmer's child, tonight everyone is locked in the same battle against the merciless cold. And as you resume your slow pacing, you realize this is just the beginning of the long night. Surviving it will take more than just endurance. It will take layers, tricks, strange beliefs, and sometimes sheer luck. But for now, you keep walking, each step echoing in the frost-laden silence, each breath another cloud disappearing into the black sky. You step down from the battlements at last, boots clattering against the spiral staircase that corkscrews deep into the keep. The stones of the stairwell hold no mercy. They seem colder than the night air, each step echoing like a drum in the hollow shaft. By the time you reach the guardroom below, the relief is immediate but only relative. The chamber is just as draughty, only shielded from the sharpest wind. Here, survival depends less on pacing and more on what you're wearing. Layers. Endless layers. That's the secret every soldier swore by. You tug off your stiffened gloves and glance at the others already lying on their pallets. They resemble bundles of cloth more than men, wrapped in linen undershirts, long woolen tunics, cloaks draped across shoulders, sometimes even spare hose tied around arms just to trap a little more warmth. You join them in this ritual, untying your outer cloak, shaking it out, then pulling it back tightly around yourself with a grunt. A mainstream fact about medieval clothing is that soldiers often wore multiple garments at once, far more than you'd imagine from museum mannequins. Linen was the base layer, chosen not for warmth but for hygiene. It could be washed more easily, though easily in medieval terms meant boiling or beating in icy streams. Over that came wool, tunics, hose, and thick cloaks. Wool was king in Europe, not only because it was warm even when damp, but because sheep provided a renewable walking factory of survival gear. Wool clothing was so prized that monarchs legislated its production and trade, knowing that without it, winters would kill more subjects than enemies ever could. Yet even wool had its limits. You shift on your straw mattress and feel the chill creep through seams at your neck and wrists. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers swore by stuffing straw or even scraps of parchment into the gaps of their clothing as makeshift insulation. It sounds desperate, and it was, but when the alternative was stiffening like a board by dawn, desperation bred creativity. Imagine rustling as you moved, sounding like a walking haystack. Yet men did it, and some accounts suggest it worked surprisingly well. Your fingers run along the edge of your cloak, tracing the coarse fibers. You remember the old soldier's tale that every extra fold of fabric bought you one more hour of life. Of course, that's exaggeration. Historians still debate whether soldiers in castles had consistent access to adequate winter clothing, or whether many were left shivering in threadbare rags. Records of lords issuing woolen cloaks to garrisons suggest attempts at provision, but we know that poverty often thinned even noble generosity. A chronic shortage of textiles left many with fewer layers than they needed. Did men freeze to death in their bunks? The chronicles are silent, which makes you wonder if it was simply too common to mention. The sensory details hit you all at once. The itch of wool against your skin, the faint lanolin smell of sheep still clinging to fibers, the mustiness of damp cloth that hasn't dried properly by the fire. Every soldier here stinks of it, but you don't care. Better to smell like a flock than to feel the bite of bare stone. You glance around the room. A few men are still awake, rubbing their arms, muttering curses under their breath. One is carefully winding spare strips of cloth around his calves, an improvised gaiter to block drafts from sneaking up the leg of his hose. Another has tied a rag under his chin, pulling his hood snug to keep his ears from freezing. These little adjustments might seem insignificant, but they are the line between comfort and agony. And yet, for all these efforts, the cold remains undefeated. The draft that snakes under the door finds you no matter what. The windows are shuttered, but slits in the wall breathe icy air like unseen mouths. You shiver and wonder how many nights like this lie ahead. You try to distract yourself with thought. How many sheep had to be sheared to clothe this garrison? How many spindles and looms rattled in nearby villages to spin the thread? There's a quiet sense of connection there. Peasants at the loom, soldiers at the wall, both bound together by wool. Without one, the other wouldn't survive. The men slowly quiet, sinking into uneasy slumber, muffled snores rising like low growls. The room feels less like a barracks and more like a cocoon, everybody wrapped and rewrapped until humanity is almost lost under layers. You lie there too, cocooned, cocooning, counting breaths. You know the truth. The cold will return tomorrow, sharper, bolder, perhaps crueler. But for tonight, you trust in your linen and wool. You believe because you must, that layers upon layers are enough to outlast the frozen stones pressing down all around. You wake with a start, the damp chill already crawling beneath your layers. The room is still dim, lit only by the faint glow of embers that crackle in the hearth across the chamber. You roll onto your side, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders, but the cold is persistent, pressing through every seam and fold. Even so, one thing sets today apart: the promise of sheepskin. Wool was useful, but fur was luxury. Sheepskin cloaks, those thick, shaggy pelts that looked like they belonged on the back of the animal rather than on a man, were the prized winter armor of castle garrisons. You watch one of your comrades shrug into his, the fleece brushing against his neck like a stubborn pillow. It isn't pretty, but you can see the difference immediately. His breath still rises in white clouds, yet his shoulders hunch with relief, not shivers. A mainstream fact is that medieval Europe relied heavily on sheepskin as a byproduct of its wool industry. While wool was woven and spun for tunics and hose, the skins themselves were tanned and fashioned into cloaks or lined garments. Unlike smooth leather, sheepskin retained the fleece, which acted as nature's insulation. Monks, peasants, and soldiers alike knew that fur was the true guardian against winter. Records from as early as the Carolingian period describe sheepskin cloaks issued in bulk to soldiers, a sign that even kings acknowledged the fur's value in keeping men alive. You drag your own cloak across your lap and sigh. Yours is threadbare, wool through and through, but lacking that shaggy fleece. You think about how many nights might feel different if only you had been issued one of those prized sheepskins. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In some regions, cloaks made of wolf or bear were considered marks of prestige, but sheepskin carried no such glamour. It was common, practical, and perhaps that's why soldiers valued it so much. There's something comforting about practicality. It doesn't boast, but it does the job. You wrap your hands in your woolen folds and recall the debate that still lingers in historical circles. Some scholars argue that sheepskin cloaks were so abundant that almost every soldier had one, while others claim they were scarce, reserved for officers or men with enough coin to buy from passing merchants. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in the middle. It depended on region, wealth, and luck. Were you garrisoned at a well-stocked border castle with steady supplies? Or were you stuck in some half-forgotten outpost where men made do with rags? The answer determined whether your cloak was a lifeline or just a heavy burden. The sensory world of sheepskin is easy to imagine. The fleece has a distinct smell, lanolin, mixed with a faint animal musk that never quite washes out. Against your cheek, it feels oily, almost sticky, yet undeniably warm. On a frigid night, that warmth is worth more than gold. You imagine pulling such a cloak around you, feeling the heat build, not from a fire, not from layers of cloth, but from the lingering presence of the animal itself. It's almost as though the sheep has not quite left your side. Some soldiers grew so attached to their cloaks that they treated them as companions, naming them, talking to them as if to a trusted comrade. It may sound eccentric, but in a world where loneliness and cold gnawed equally at the spirit, a cloak could become a surrogate friend. You smile faintly at the thought, though your lips crack from dryness. The hearth pops, spitting sparks. A few men stir, their sheepskins rustling softly. One pulls his cloak over his head entirely, disappearing beneath it like a turtle in its shell. You envy him. Even as you shift uncomfortably on your straw pallet, you imagine stepping out onto the battlements wrapped in fleece, the wind still cutting but dulled, as if softened by a cushion of wool. Historians sometimes wonder whether soldiers layered sheepskin cloaks over their armor during winter watches. Some accounts suggest yes, though this would have limited movement. Others say no, that the weight of mail and plate was burden enough without adding bulk. Perhaps the answer varied by circumstance on a bitter night without combat. A guard might well swaddle himself in fleece. If danger struck, though, he'd cast it off, trading warmth for agility. You roll onto your back and stare at the shadowed rafters above. The castle seems to breathe around you, exhaling damp draughts from unseen cracks. You think again of the sheep, the flocks in the fields that birthed the cloaks, grazing in quiet meadows while men like you shivered behind stone walls. You wonder if they sense their importance, if they know that their very skins were saving lives far away. Probably not. Sheep never struck you as the philosophical type. Still, you let the thought linger, because it's oddly soothing. Survival is never glamorous. Sometimes it is as humble as wrapping yourself in the hide of another creature and being thankful that someone, somewhere, decided to shear wool and tan skin for the sake of men who would never meet them. And as the first pale light creeps through the slits of the wall, you sit up, brush straw from your tunic, and prepare yourself for another day of bone-chilling cold. Cloaked or not, fleece or not, you rise to face the morning, with the stubbornness of someone who knows that the cold won't relent, but neither will you. The day drags on, bitter and grey, and by the time night comes again, you're too tired to care where you lay your head until you feel the ground. The cold stone floor is like sleeping on an ice block, every joint pressed against it aching as though the marrow itself might freeze. That's when you thank the simplest invention of them all, the straw mattress. You shuffle toward your pallet, little more than a sack stuffed with hay, reeds, or whatever could be gathered. It crinkles beneath you as you collapse, a sound like dry parchment snapping. Primitive as it seems, it's still better than stone. You roll onto your side and instantly sense the difference. The straw lifts you a finger's breadth away from the icy floor, a barrier so small yet so important that you almost weep with gratitude. A mainstream historical fact, straw bedding was the standard across Europe for centuries, especially among common soldiers and peasants. Castles were filled with these rustling sacks, sometimes called palliasses. They weren't luxurious, but they were essential. Without them, sickness spread more easily, limbs stiffened overnight, and morale plummeted. Soldiers on campaign often carried empty tickings, cloth bags to be stuffed with hay from fields wherever they camped. In castles, at least, there was usually a stable or barn nearby to replenish the bedding. Of course, straw came with its own quirks. You shift on yours, scratching at your neck. Within days, fleas and lice invade the mattress. turning it into a writhing colony. That's the quirky tidbit. Medieval manuals advised changing or burning the straw at least once a season, but soldiers often went far longer, enduring the constant itch. Some tried mixing in aromatic herbs like lavender or wormwood to keep pests away, but these were luxuries not always available to lowly garrisons. Imagine trying to rest while your bed itself nipped at you as eagerly as the cold. You pull your cloak tight and settle again, trying to ignore the scratchiness. The straw has an earthy scent, half comforting, half suffocating. Close your eyes and you can almost imagine lying in a meadow at midsummer, warm sun above, insects buzzing lazily. But then the draught finds your cheek, and reality returns. This is no meadow. This is a stone chamber with frost creeping along its edges. Historians are still divided over just how effective straw bedding was in protecting health. Some suggest it was a lifesaver, reducing cases of pneumonia by insulating soldiers from cold floors. Others argue the infestation of vermin may have caused more disease than the bedding prevented. It's an uncomfortable balance between warmth and hygiene, between one enemy and another. Your senses are alive with contradictions. The faint warmth of straw beneath your body, the cold air clinging to your skin, the itch at your wrist from some unseen flea. Every shuffle produces a whispery crunch, a sound oddly soothing, as if the mattress itself sighs along with your exhaustion. Nearby, one of your comrades mutters in his sleep, shifting heavily, his own straw pallet rustling like a field in wind. Another man sneezes, curses, then rolls over. The chamber is filled with the chorus of human survival, snoring, shuffling, coughing, each soldier doing his best to trick the body into rest despite the unwelcoming environment. And then there's the odd psychological comfort of having something beneath you, no matter how humble. Sleeping on bare stone feels degrading, a reminder of your low status. A straw sack, on the other hand, gives the illusion of a bed, of humanity preserved. In a world where honor and morale mattered as much as swords, even this illusion kept soldiers sane. You sigh and burrow deeper, ignoring the itchy straw prickling through the fabric. Tomorrow, you'll rise stiff and sore, bits of hay stuck to your tunic. But tonight it's enough. You're lifted just far enough away from the frozen stone that dreams might be possible. And so you let yourself drift, lulled by the rustle of straw, the smell of earth and sheep, and the dim hope that this sack of hay is the thin line holding you back from death's cold grip. The rustling of straw fades into the deeper night, but you are not alone in your pallet. Not really. You can feel the closeness of bodies all around you, wrapped in wool, cloaks, and rags, packed together like salted fish in a barrel. At first, it feels awkward, the press of another man's elbow, the occasional shift that knocks into your ribs, but soon you realize this was no accident. This was strategy. Shared body heat. It's not glamorous, but it works. You shuffle closer to the man beside you, and he doesn't flinch. He's just as desperate as you. Together, you form an awkward barricade against the cold, human warmth, seeping out and mingling until it almost feels like a fire without flame. One more soldier joins, then another, until the room is a knot of tangled limbs and uneven breaths. The smell of sweat and wool fills the air, but you don't complain. Tonight, survival trumps dignity. A mainstream fact, medieval soldiers often slept communally, not only for space, but for warmth. Garrison roles show that barracks were rarely designed for privacy. Instead, they were open chambers with pallets laid side by side. The principle was simple: more bodies in one place meant less heat lost. Chroniclers describe soldiers huddling like pups in a litter during winter campaigns. It wasn't sentiment, it was science before they had the word for it. The quirky tidbit comes when you consider just how close those bonds could get. Some sources mention soldiers deliberately rotating sleeping spots, so no one was left exposed to drafts by the wall night after night. Others told jokes about marrying the warmth of your bunkmate, dark humor, but humor nonetheless. You smile at the idea that gallows humor warmed the soul as much as the body. Historians still argue whether this huddling was universal practice or exaggerated by later romantic tales of brotherhood. Was it necessity in every fortress, or just the stuff of poetic embellishment? Evidence suggests it was real enough, though perhaps not as noble as legend paints it. You imagine that in the stink of unwashed bodies and the itch of vermin, the gesture wasn't about loyalty but sheer desperation. Your senses remind you: the press of warmth against your shoulder, the rank smell of men who hadn't bathed in weeks, the muffled sound of someone grinding their teeth in restless dreams. You wrinkle your nose but then relax because the alternative would be worse. Better stink than frostbite. As you lie there, pressed between comrades, you notice something else. The human contact itself calms you. The cold isolates makes you feel small against the vastness of stone and winter, but here you are tethered. You breathe together, rise and fall with the rhythm of the group, your chest expanding in sync with strangers who suddenly feel like kin. The boundaries between you blur in the dark, and you wonder if this is how pack animals endure the warmth, not just physical, but psychological. The night stretches on, and though drafts still creep under the door, though stone still leaches away warmth, you find yourself dozing. You hear faint whispers, someone muttering a prayer, another telling a joke about lice marching in ranks. Laughter ripples softly, quickly swallowed by snores. The truth is, no one survives winter alone in a castle. The stone is too harsh, the wind too cruel. You need layers, you need straw, but above all, you need one another. And so, you settle deeper into the knot of bodies, breathing in time with men you barely know, trusting that together you might make it through till dawn. The bodies pressed against you stir, and slowly the group unknots itself. Men stretch stiff limbs, scratch at itchy spots, and mutter about the endless cold. You rise too, dragging your cloak around your shoulders, your bones aching from a night spent cocooned in sweat and straw. But when you open the chamber door, a new sensation greets you: warmth, faint and flickering, drifting from the hearth in the great hall below. You shuffle down the stairs, boots echoing, and the glow grows brighter. When you step into the hall, the sight is almost miraculous. A wide, stone fireplace yawns open, its blackened mouth swallowing logs whole, while the fire inside spits sparks and crackles like it's mocking the winter outside. Soldiers gather in clusters around braziers, iron cauldrons on legs filled with glowing coals, stretching their hands out, backs hunched like worshippers at an altar. You drift toward one yourself, letting the heat lick at your fingers, the sensation like life flooding back into you after being gone too long. A mainstream fact about castles: many of them had large hearths in central halls, designed not just for cooking but for heating the garrison. But heating a castle was always a losing battle. The vast spaces, high ceilings, and drafty stone walls swallowed warmth whole. Fires provided local relief, but step more than a few feet away, and the cold wrapped you again like a predator. To combat this, portable braziers became essential. Men hauled them from room to room, filling them with charcoal or wood embers to create islands of warmth in the sea of chill. You crouch near one brazier, hands outstretched, and almost weep as blood returns to your fingers. The smell of smoke curls into your nostrils, mingling with the tang of iron and sweat. Your eyes sting, but you don't care. You lean closer still, until your cheeks flush red, the contrast between numb toes and burning face making you feel oddly dizzy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Soldiers sometimes slipped heated stones or bricks from these hearths into their bedding at night. Wrapped in cloth, the stones acted as primitive hot water bottles, radiating heat for hours. It was a clever hack until someone inevitably misjudged the wrapping and woke to smouldering straw. Tales of accidental mattress fires circulated like cautionary fables, the kind told with grim laughter. "Better to freeze," one old captain quipped, "than roast like a goose in your own bed." Historians still puzzle over how effective castle fireplaces really were in warming more than just a privileged few. Was the Great Hall truly a communal haven? Or was most of its heat absorbed by lords and officers while the rank and file shivered in side chambers? Some argue that the sheer scale of medieval great halls made them almost impossible to heat properly, no matter how massive the fire. Others counter that in moments of crisis, especially during sieges, lords may have ordered constant fuel to keep morale up. The evidence is contradictory, leaving us with half a picture: warmth as both necessity and luxury, given unevenly according to rank and circumstance. You sit on the cold bench near the fire, shoulders hunched, listening to the crackle. Around you, men murmur quietly, voices softened by relief. One soldier extends his boots toward the blaze, steam rising faintly as the damp leather dries. Another pokes the fire with a stick, coaxing it higher, then smirks like he's tamed a beast. There's a sense of fellowship here, fragile but real, forged in the glow of shared heat. The sensory contrast is almost intoxicating. The fire roars, warmth flooding your face, but your back remains icy, the stone wall behind you pressing chill into your spine. It's like existing in two seasons at once. Summer before you, winter at your back. Your skin prickles, unsure whether to sweat or shiver. You look toward the upper gallery, where richer chambers are tucked. The lord's rooms are smaller, more contained, easier to heat. Tapestries line their walls, blocking drafts, while braziers and furs soften the sting of night. You feel a twinge of envy. Rank has its privileges. But you also know that soldiers on the floor here, shoulder to shoulder with braziers, build their own sort of resilience. Perhaps the Lord feels warm tonight, but will he last a bitter siege when firewood grows scarce? Will he know how to endure when the flames shrink to embers? The hall grows smoky, and the scent clings to your cloak. You cough once, laugh softly, and realize smoke has its own comfort. It reminds you the fire is real, alive, burning just enough to hold back death. It carries the smell of cooking too, some pot slung above the embers, a thin broth bubbling, promising heat from the inside later tonight. You lick cracked lips in anticipation. Your mind drifts to the precariousness of fuel itself. A fire is only as strong as its woodpile, and in winter, trees are harder to fell, wagons harder to haul. You imagine the castle's stores dwindling, wood stacked neatly in sheds, men counting logs like treasure. Some records tell of sieges where desperation forced garrisons to burn furniture, carts, even the wooden hoardings that once defended their own walls. The thought sends a chill deeper than the draft. What happens when even the hearth goes dark? But tonight, you have heat. You sit, drowsy now, the warmth making your eyelids heavy. The fire hums its lullaby of crackles and pops, and you think about the odd relationship between man and flame. Without it, you're helpless, just another animal in the cold. With it, you feel almost invincible, as though nothing could breach the circle of light and warmth around you. Yet it is fragile, always needing to be fed, always threatening to sputter out. You lean forward, stretching your hands again, marveling at how quickly heat escapes. Just minutes away from the brazier, your fingers already start to stiffen, blood retreating as though it knows the fight is unwinnable. But you return, and the cycle continues: warmth, cold, warmth, cold, a dance as old as mankind. The hall quiets as men drift back to their pallets, warmed enough to risk sleep. You linger longer, unwilling to let go of the fire's comfort. You watch the logs collapse inward, glowing red, like a fortress in miniature under siege from the flames themselves. You chuckle at the irony, then finally pull yourself away. Your cloak smells of smoke now, a scent that will cling for days, but you don't mind. It's the perfume of survival. You climb back to your chamber, cheeks flushed, heart steadier. The cold greets you again, but this time it feels less cruel, dulled by memory of the hearth's embrace. You curl onto your straw, pull your cloak over your head, and tell yourself you can last another night. After all, the fire is still burning below, and tomorrow you will return to it again. The next evening settles like a frost-laden blanket, thick and merciless, the kind that seeps into marrow and mocks every layer of wool. You're back on the wall for watch duty, the wind biting at your face so sharply You wonder if your nose will ever thaw again. The brazier you left in the hall feels like a memory now distant, fading, almost dreamlike. Up here, with nothing but stone beneath your boots and sky above, you're reduced to smaller measures of survival. You shift your gaze to the stub of a candle flickering in its holder on the wall walk. Its light is faint, a trembling halo, barely strong enough to push back the shadows. But as you shuffle closer, cupping your hands around it to block the gusts, you realize that the flame gives off not just light but warmth, small, fragile, yet undeniably there. You lean toward it, cheek tingling, palms stretched near the little glow, and marvel at how a lump of tallow can make the night slightly less unbearable. A mainstream fact. Candles and rushlights were more than tools of illumination in the Middle Ages. They were guardians against despair and discomfort. In castles, torches lit the main halls, but personal spaces, guard rooms, private chambers, even watchposts relied heavily on these smaller lights. Made of tallow, rendered animal fat, or beeswax if one was wealthy, candles burned steadily, releasing a soft warmth that soldiers quickly came to appreciate. No, a candle couldn't heat a chamber, but when your face was stiff with cold and your breath hung frozen, its glow made you feel human again. You lick dry lips and glance down at the stub, thinking about the greasy smell of tallow. It clings to the air, earthy and faintly rancid, a reminder that the candle was born of animals butchered long ago. It's not pleasant, yet it anchors you because even rancid fat carries life when burned against the night. The flame dances, teasing your eyes with its rhythm, and you find yourself mesmerized, as though it's whispering a promise. I'll keep you company until the dawn. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers believed that sitting close to a cluster of candles could ward off chills, almost like miniature hearths. A bundle of 10 or more could indeed raise the temperature of a small enclosed room by a surprising degree. In fact, one recorded trick involved placing candles beneath an upturned clay pot. The flame's heat would gather under the pot and radiate outward like a primitive space heater. You grin at the thought of medieval men inventing DIY survival hacks long before YouTube tutorials existed. Of course, the danger was ever present. Fires started this way too, sometimes consuming entire barracks in their hungry spread. Historians still puzzle over the symbolic role of these flames. Were they purely practical, or did men invest them with deeper meaning? Some argue that in the bitter isolation of garrisons, a candle became more than light, it was companionship, even a spiritual ally. Others dismiss this, saying soldiers were too pragmatic to project emotions onto tallow and wick. Yet you, standing in the cold, know exactly which side feels right. When darkness gnaws at you, you cling to any ember, however small, and convince yourself it matters. You lean in closer, your breath threatening to snuff the flame, and quickly pull back, heart lurching. The idea of losing this tiny source of comfort terrifies you more than you'd admit. You realize how fragile it is, how a single gust, a careless elbow, or even your own exhale, could plunge you back into total darkness. Survival here is not grand and glorious. It is precarious, dependent on things so small you might laugh if you weren't shivering. The soundscape changes when you let yourself notice. The candle hums faintly, the wax dripping in soft ticks against the stone. Wind groans along the battlements, rattling shutters below, but your ears fix on the fragile buzz of that flame. The contrast is soothing, a raging world outside, but here, within a hand's span, a sanctuary. You think of moths drawn to light, and for once you understand them perfectly. A comrade approaches, stomping his boots to stir circulation, and he chuckles when he sees you hunched over the stub. "Married to it, are you?" he teases, voice muffled through a scarf wound tight around his chin. You shrug, grin faintly, and say nothing. Because in truth, yes, you are married to it, bound by gratitude. He produces another candle from a pouch, lights it from the first, and sets it down beside yours. 2 flames now, doubling the glow, doubling the comfort. The air around them feels a shade warmer, enough that you and he draw closer, shoulders nearly touching. You watch the flames sway together, their tiny bodies braving the gusts, and it feels like victory, however modest. You recall stories whispered in the barracks, men telling of candles that burned brighter when danger approached, or flames that refused to stay lit if death lingered nearby. Superstition or truth, you can't help but wonder. Every flicker seems like a message, every sputter like a warning. Perhaps it's nonsense, perhaps not. You know only that it keeps your mind occupied, and occupation is its own form of survival. Your senses linger on the textures, the smooth dripping wax pooling like frozen tears, the hiss as an occasional drop lands on cold stone, the faint heat kissing your face when you lean too near. You marvel at how something so small, so easily dismissed, now feels like your only ally in the void. And then, the moment of fragility, a sudden gust slams into the wall walk, rattling your hood, and one of the flames gutters out. You and your comrade instinctively shield the survivor, cupping hands around it, protecting it as though it were a child. You succeed, and the flame stabilizes, quivering but alive. The relief you feel is absurdly intense. You laugh nervously, realizing that your entire night's sanity may hang on this little stub of burning fat. Historians may argue endlessly about the utility of candles, but no debate can capture this, the emotional anchor they provided. Fireplaces roared, braziers smoked, but candles whispered. They reminded you that warmth could be humble, that light could live even in the smallest vessel. The shift ends, and you reluctantly snuff your stub, pinching wick between calloused fingers. Smoke spirals upward, carrying with it the last taste of tallow. You inhale it, grimace, and yet feel oddly comforted. Tomorrow night another stub will be lit, another small flame will hold the dark at bay. You trudge back down the stairs, eyes still carrying the afterglow, and realize that in a castle of cold stone, even the faintest flame can feel like a miracle. The guard rotation ends, and you descend once more into the keep. Your body aches from the chill, but as you pass through the courtyard you notice something peculiar, the stark difference between two buildings side by side. One is the mighty stone tower, the keep itself, rising like a frozen monument. The other, smaller and humbler, is a timber structure, a granary or a wooden watchtower, its walls lined with planks rather than cut blocks. Instinctively, you edge toward the wood. You know why. It feels warmer. It's a paradox, isn't it? You'd think the grand stone walls would offer more protection, but at night they're cruel. Stone radiates cold long after sunset, drinking up whatever heat dares to linger. Wood, by contrast, holds warmth like a miser clutching coins. You slip inside the wooden tower and instantly notice the difference. The air isn't balmy, but it's less biting. The timbers creak and flex, giving the impression of a living structure, one that shifts and breathes rather than suffocates. A mainstream fact, in early medieval Europe, many lords still relied on wooden keeps before the age of great stone castles. Archaeologists have uncovered motte and bailey fortifications, simple wooden towers perched on earth mounds that served both defensive and domestic purposes. These weren't just cheaper and quicker to build, they were easier to endure in winter. Stone castles eventually replaced them for durability and defense, but many chroniclers noted that wood was gentler on human bodies. Some accounts even say that men stationed in wooden towers slept better than those in grander stone halls. You run your hand along the planks, feeling the grain beneath your fingertips. There's a faint resinous scent, pine perhaps, that clings to the structure, soothing compared to the damp mineral smell of limestone. You draw in a deep breath, and for a fleeting moment, imagine you're in a cabin rather than a fortress, snug and simple. Here's the quirky tidbit. Soldiers sometimes stuffed moss or clay into the gaps between timbers as insulation. This primitive caulking method kept drafts out, a trick borrowed from peasant huts. In some regions, they even used animal dung mixed with straw, a foul but effective filler. You can picture it now, a squad of soldiers smearing muck into wall cracks, joking grimly about how nothing keeps the devil out like a wall of dung. And perhaps, on freezing nights, they were right. Historians still debate whether the preference for stone was purely military or whether lords truly believed it improved living conditions. After all, stone looked impressive, projecting authority and permanence, while wood seemed humble, even temporary. Some scholars suggest lords sacrificed comfort for prestige, choosing castles that displayed power even if their soldiers suffered in icy barracks. Others argue that stone could indeed be warmer if well designed, with tapestries, fireplaces, and clever venting. The truth likely varied from fortress to fortress, with most common soldiers never tasting the benefits of such luxury. Your senses sharpen as you settle onto a bench inside the wooden tower. The timber walls groan softly in the wind, like an old man sighing. The sound is oddly comforting, less harsh than the echoing silence of stone corridors. You catch the faint crackle of resin in the wood as it adjusts to the cold, a small reminder that the material itself is alive, dynamic. Compared to the stone keep, which feels like a tomb, this wooden chamber has warmth not just in temperature, but in spirit. You lean against the wall, and the difference is clear. Instead of the biting chill of granite, the wood presses back gently, almost neutrally. You close your eyes and imagine yourself back in childhood, leaning against the side of a barn or a cottage wall, safe from the elements. It's strange how memory itself can insulate you, how a sensory detail conjures comfort far beyond its physical reality. Around you, a few fellow soldiers mutter about the unfairness of it all, how the lord sleeps in a private chamber, lined with tapestries while they huddle in the icy stone barracks. One grumbles that he'd trade his sword for a wooden hut in the village, at least until spring thaw. The others laugh, not because it's absurd, but because they're thinking the same thing. You picture the village cottages, their low roofs and wattle and daub walls plastered with mud. They were nothing compared to castles, yet peasants survived winter there with fires in their hearths, families clustered close, and that same wooden warmth you now savour. Perhaps the castle was safer from arrows, but when it came to the cold, the peasants had the advantage. Your mind wanders to a darker image, a siege. Imagine being trapped in the stone keep for months, fuel dwindling, stone walls leaching away every flicker of warmth, men huddling in corners, frost clinging to their beards, the air so cold that ink froze in wells and wine turned to slush. Would a wooden tower have been worse in defense? Certainly. But for the men inside, at least their nights might have been kinder. You run your hand along the timber again, your palm leaving a faint smear of warmth behind. It feels almost like stroking an animal's flank, a connection to something organic. Stone is deathly cold, a monument to permanence. Wood is impermanent, fragile, but forgiving. You wonder if soldiers felt the same contradiction, that survival was sometimes easier in what the lords dismissed as temporary. The wind rattles the shutters, but the draughts that seep through are weaker than those in the stone hall. Someone has indeed stuffed moss in the gaps, and you silently thank him. You breathe in the earthy scent, a mixture of sap, dampness, and human labour, and feel gratitude for every small effort men made to soften the night. A comrade sits beside you, tugging his cloak tighter. "Feels less like a tomb in here, doesn't it?" he says with a tired grin. You nod. Because it does. And in a world where every scrap of comfort counts, even the humble choice between wood and stone could mean the difference between misery and tolerable sleep. You settle deeper, closing your eyes, and let the wooden tower creak around you like a lullaby. Outside, the stone castle looms, cold and magnificent, but tonight you prefer the humbler company of timber. It is less grand, less eternal, but kinder to flesh and bone. The wooden tower's warmth lingers in your mind the next day, but by evening you find yourself back in the draughty great hall. The fire is low, shadows stretch long, and the scent of wood smoke clings to every cloak. Your stomach growls, because tonight warmth comes not only from braziers and blankets, but from what you swallow. You shuffle toward the trestle table where a pot of broth steams faintly, ladled into rough wooden bowls for whoever's turn it is to eat. The first sip is almost holy. Heat spreads across your tongue, down your throat, settling into your chest like an ember tucked beneath your ribs. It isn't much barley, some root vegetables, maybe a scrap of salted pork floating like treasure, but it transforms the way you feel. The cold outside still presses at the walls, but inside you carry a small hearth. A mainstream fact. Medieval garrisons relied heavily on hot liquids to fend off the cold. Ale, beer, and weak wine were staples because water was often unsafe. In winter, these drinks were served warm when possible, heated gently over coals, creating mulled concoctions spiced with herbs or, in wealthier households, cinnamon and cloves from the east. Soups and pottages, the thick stews of peas, beans, and whatever meat scraps could be spared, were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Warm food didn't just nourish, it kept the body fighting against frost. Chronicles mention commanders ordering extra rations of hot broth during long winter watches, acknowledging that morale itself could be ladled into a bowl. You tip the vessel back again, steam fogging your cheeks. The flavor is earthy, humble, salted enough to sting cracked lips, but you don't complain. Around you, men slurp greedily, some blowing into their bowls, others sipping too quickly and hissing as tongues scald. The hall fills with the music of hunger, clinks of wooden spoons, gulps, satisfied sighs. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some garrisons, soldiers swore by hot ale as a cure, all for the winter blues. Mixed with a little butter or egg yolk, it became something called posset, both drink and food at once. The concoction was thought to fortify the body, ward off colds, and even help men sleep. Imagine a room of burly soldiers sipping what amounts to medieval eggnog, grinning through froth clinging to their moustaches. Not exactly the image of fierce warriors, yet in the coldest months, posset may have saved more lives than swords. Historians still argue whether these warming rations were consistently available to common soldiers or mainly to those higher in rank. Some records hint at abundance, castle kitchens producing gallons of broth and casks of ale. Others paint a grimmer picture, with men forced to gnaw on frozen bread crusts and drink snowmelt when supplies dwindled. The truth probably oscillated with fortune, some winters generous, others harsh. What is certain is that the craving for warmth in the belly was universal, from lord to lowliest sentry. Your senses revel in the moment, the steam rising into your nose, the salty tang coating your tongue, the slow spread of heat into your stomach. The broth feels alive in you, pulsing outward to your fingertips, loosening stiff joints. For the first time in days, your shoulders unclench, your jaw relaxes. You didn't realize how tightly you'd been holding yourself until warmth reminded you what ease felt like. A soldier beside you grins, raising his bowl. "Better than a fur cloak," he declares, and others nod in agreement. They know he isn't exaggerating. A meal like this buys hours of comfort, perhaps even restful sleep. You think about how fragile that comfort is. The pot will empty soon, the bowls will be licked clean, and by dawn hunger will return. But for now, you allow yourself to savor the illusion of plenty. You look into your bowl, at the cloudy broth swirling with stray barley grains, and see something almost sacred. This is not just food, this is survival. Your mind drifts to the peasants beyond the walls, tending cauldrons in their huts, feeding families on thin cabbage soups. There's kinship here, different lives, same instinct, fill the belly with warmth to trick the body into enduring. You wonder if they too sit around fires at night, bowls in hand, sighing with relief at each mouthful. Probably. The cold is democratic. It humbles everyone. The hall grows quieter as men finish their meals, slumping against walls, some licking spoons absent-mindedly. You lick your own, savoring the salty wood of the utensil, then scrape the last traces from the bowl. It's pitiful. Really so little food, so much need, but the warmth lingers, and that's what matters. There's a superstition whispered among the ranks that a man who eats hot broth at midnight will not die of frost by morning. Do you believe it? Maybe. Or maybe you just want to. Sometimes faith is easier than reason. The steam from your bowl has already faded, but the memory remains. You breathe out slowly, fog mingling with smoke, and allow yourself a half smile. Historians may debate the accuracy of garrison records, but they cannot debate the power of this sensation, the quiet, private victory of warmth spreading from stomach to skin. It is a victory fought one sip at a time, one bowl at a time, a victory repeated night after night in countless castles. You push the bowl away, draw your cloak tighter, and lie back on your straw. The cold will come again, ruthless and unrelenting. But for now, you carry a secret weapon inside you. Broth, ale, a fleeting ember that makes you believe you can outlast the night. Your belly still remembers the broth from the night before, but hunger is never satisfied for long in a castle garrison. By the time darkness falls again, your thoughts turn not to fire or straw, but to food the dense kind, the kind that lingers. Tonight it is salted meat, tough and briny, but strangely comforting. You sit on your pallet, knife in hand, carving thin strips from a hunk of beef so heavily salted it might as well be stone. The surface glitters with crystals, sharp enough to sting your fingertips. You gnaw a slice, jaws aching with the effort, but as you chew, the salt melts and meat softens, releasing a slow heat in your stomach. It is not tender, it is not fresh, but it is fuel, and you welcome it like an old, ugly friend. A mainstream fact: preserved meats were staples of medieval soldiers' diets, especially in winter. Salting, smoking, and drying allowed beef, pork, and fish to survive months without spoiling. Castles stockpiled barrels of salted meat in their storerooms, preparing for lean seasons and sieges alike. Garrison rolls and accounts from the 100 Years' War show that soldiers received salted rations daily, often with bread and ale, a monotony broken only by the rare addition of fresh game or vegetables. Salt itself was precious, a commodity controlled and taxed by lords, yet it doubled as a preservative that made survival possible. You bite again, tongue burning from brine. The flavor is overwhelming, but you know this salt is more than seasoning, it keeps sickness at bay. In times when foodborne illness could kill more quickly than battle wounds, salt meant safety. Still, you chuckle softly, because the meat is so dry it feels like chewing leather straps. You picture soldiers sharpening their teeth on it, or comparing chunks to shoe soles. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Many soldiers softened salted meat by soaking it in ale or broth overnight, turning it into something chewable by dawn. In fact, some joked that ale wasn't just for drinking, it was a cooking tool. One account even tells of men wrapping salted beef in damp cloth and tucking it near a brazier, letting it steam until it loosened. The smell must have been pungent, half savory, half acrid, but in the freezing dark, it probably seemed like a feast. Historians remain divided on whether salted meat actually improved warmth in the body or merely provided the illusion of strength. Some nutritionists argue it gave soldiers crucial protein and calories for winter endurance. Others suggest the high salt content left men dehydrated, forcing them to drink more ale and thereby stumble through nights half drunk. Was salted meat sustenance or sabotage? The records leave plenty of room for debate. Your senses, however, know the truth of the moment. The salty tang burns your cracked lips, stings your tongue, but once swallowed, it spreads satisfaction. You chew methodically, the crunch of salt loud in your ears, the fibrous meat resisting until at last it yields. The aftertaste lingers, metallic and earthy, a reminder of both the animal it came from and the barrel it's been entombed in for months. Around you, the other soldiers chew in silence. The hall is filled not with conversation, but with the rhythmic grind of jaws. Occasionally someone spits out a too salty fragment, grimacing, then shrugs and takes another bite. It isn't joy, but it is ritual, and ritual itself can be comforting. You notice one man carefully slicing his portion into smaller strips, almost reverently. He tucks some into his pouch, saving it for later. Another shoves his whole ration into his mouth at once, as though hoping to finish quickly before his body realizes how unappetizing it is. You grin, because everyone has their way of coping with the monotony. The smell in the room is heavy salt, smoke, faint rot that no barrel can ever truly hide. You wrinkle your nose but keep chewing. Hunger teaches tolerance. As you eat, your mind drifts beyond the castle walls. You imagine the peasants in their huts eating pottage of cabbage and onions. Humble fare, but perhaps tastier than your salted slab. You wonder if they envy you, the soldier with his meat ration, or pity you, gnawing like a dog on preserved flesh. The thought amuses you, because in winter, envy and pity blur into the same thing. Everyone is just trying to make it through the night. One soldier breaks the silence with a superstition. He swears that eating meat before bed keeps nightmares away, that protein anchors the soul in the body. Others scoff, but you pause, considering. Perhaps it's nonsense. Perhaps the salt itself does the trick, preserving not only the flesh but your spirit until morning. In this world, who's to say? Historians often overlook the small comfort salted meat gave because they focus on its scarcity, its monotony, its dangers. But here, in the flicker of torchlight, you feel it differently. It is a ritual of endurance. Cut, chew, swallow, endure. A mantra repeated night after night until spring returns. When your ration is gone, you lick the salt from your fingers, savoring the sting on your cracked skin. You lean back on your straw, the taste still clinging to your tongue, and feel a modest strength seep into your muscles. Tomorrow, you will curse the monotony again. But tonight, you are grateful. The cold still prowls outside, but inside, you carry something solid, dense, unyielding like the castle walls themselves. It isn't delicious, it isn't soft, but neither are you. The salted meat sits heavy in your stomach, like a stone wrapped in brine, but the night offers no mercy. As the last of the torches sputter, the captain of the watch shakes your shoulder. Your turn again. You groan, half cursing under your breath, but orders are orders. The castle may slumber, but it cannot afford blindness in the dark. You pull on your cloak, stiff from yesterday's frost, and stumble out onto the wall walk. The wind hits you first raw, unfiltered, slipping straight through seams of cloth as though mocking every layer you wear. You clutch your spear, plant your boots, and begin the long march of the sentry, pacing back and forth, step after step, as though walking might trick your blood into moving faster. A mainstream fact: medieval night watches were brutal. Soldiers were divided into shifts, often lasting several hours, with no guarantee of warmth or comfort. Guard duty in winter was considered both necessary and torturous. Necessary because castles were always vulnerable to sudden attack, and torturous because it meant exposure to the harshest hours when the body most craved rest. Chronicles describe men collapsing from exhaustion or frost, their only crime being unlucky assignment. Some commanders rotated watches frequently to spare their soldiers. Others cared less, letting fatigue claim whoever it might. You pull your hood tight, breath coming out in pale clouds. The soundscape is lonely boots crunching against stone, the occasional creak of timber, the distant bark of a dog in the village below. Your ears strain for more sinister sounds. Footsteps on the drawbridge, clatter of ladders, the whistle of an arrow in the dark. But mostly you hear nothing, and nothing becomes the enemy. Silence gnaws at you, each moment stretching like taffy until you wonder if dawn will ever come. The quirky tidbit comes from the strange ways men fought this silence. Some sang under their breath, half-whispered ballads to keep themselves awake. Others gnawed on hard bread or even sucked on stones, the act of chewing staving off sleep. A few desperate souls pricked their thighs with daggers, tiny cuts meant to jolt the body alert. You chuckle grimly, because pacing already feels like punishment enough. Still, you understand. The line between drowsy and dead is thin when the air itself conspires against you. Historians still argue whether punishment for a dozing sentry was consistently as severe as the chronicles claim. Some accounts speak of execution for sleeping at one's post, others of simple flogging or fines. Perhaps it depended on the lord, the severity of the war, or the mood of the captain. What is certain is that fear itself was a motivator. No one wanted to be caught nodding, so they walked, muttered, paced, and prayed, hour after hour, with frost nibbling at fingers and toes. You pace now, spear knocking gently against the parapet with each turn. The stones radiate cold through your boots, and your toes go numb until you no longer feel them. You flex your hands, slap your arms, blow into your palms, but relief is brief. Your nose runs, eyes water, throat rasps with every inhale of frozen air, and still you walk. The sensory details sharpen because there is nothing else to occupy you. The torch flame sputters with each gust, hissing angrily. The shadows seem to move, stretching like phantoms across the courtyard. You smell damp stone, smoke faint from the hall below, and your own sweat freezing into your cloak. You taste salt still lingering on your tongue from the meat, a reminder of dinner that now feels like another lifetime. You pass another sentry at the corner tower. He nods, eyes hollow, lips blue. Neither of you speaks. Words feel unnecessary, wasted in the wind. Instead, you share a brief moment of solidarity, two frozen souls tethered to the same duty. He turns back to his post, you to yours, and the silence resumes. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you hear your captain's voice from earlier. Keep moving. A still man is a dead man. You wonder if he knows how literal those words feel. Stopping even for a minute tempts sleep, and sleep tempts death. So you march. Your thoughts wander, because what else is there to do? You imagine the warmth of a village hearth, a wife's embrace, the laughter of children tucked under blankets. Fantasies, yes, but necessary ones. Without them, the watch would crush your spirit as surely as the cold crushes your body. You grip your spear tighter, pretending it's a staff guiding you through the dark. The hours drag. Time seems to stretch, the moon hanging stubbornly above the hills as though mocking your misery. You begin to wonder if dawn is a myth, if the world is nothing but endless night. Then a sound breaks the monotony, the low hoot of an owl. You freeze, heart racing, ears straining for more. Nothing follows, just a bird. You exhale in shaky relief, laugh softly at your own nerves, and resume pacing. There's a superstition among the men that an owl's cry during watch is good luck, a sign the gods themselves are keeping guard with you. Do you believe it? Maybe. Right now, you'll take anything. Historians may argue about the cruelty of medieval watch duty, but standing here you know it's not cruelty that defines it, it's endurance. The ability to keep moving, to keep breathing, to keep eyes open when everything in you begs for rest. You're not a hero tonight. You're just a body that refuses to fall. At last, faint light creeps across the horizon. Dawn paints the snowfields pale blue, and the sky softens from black to grey. You exhale in relief, shoulders sagging. The shift is over. You're alive. Your feet may be numb, your fingers raw, but the castle still stands, and so do you. You hand your spear to the next man, stumble down the stairs, and collapse onto your straw mattress. Sleep takes you quickly, the cold still clawing at your skin, but for now, duty is done. You have endured another night on watch, another battle with the merciless cold. When you wake, the stiffness in your hands is the first reminder of the night. Your fingers curl reluctantly, swollen and raw, the memory of the spear's shaft still imprinted in your palms. You groan, flexing them slowly, as though coaxing life back into frozen wood. And then the thought strikes you. What of the weapons themselves? Steel is treacherous in winter. Leave your sword, spearhead, or helmet exposed on a night like last, and it will feel like touching ice straight from a river. You wince remembering the burn of frost against bare skin because frostbite doesn't care whether it comes from stone, wind, or the very tools meant to keep you alive. A mainstream fact. Medieval soldiers had to tend their weapons constantly, not just for battle readiness, but for survival in harsh weather. Swords and armor could freeze stiff, the metal contracting and becoming brittle under extreme cold. Mail links might seize, helmets might crack, spear shafts could split as moisture froze and expanded. Chronicles mention garrisons struggling not only against enemies but against rust, frost, and the sheer hostility of the environment. To keep weapons functional, soldiers polished them with oil or fat, rubbed them down with cloth, and kept them near heat whenever possible. A sword was useless if your hands stuck to the hilt like tongues to frozen iron. You look across the room. A few men are busy already, huddled near the hearth, rubbing down their gear with rag and tallow. The smell of it greasy, acrid, animal-like wafts through the air. You join them, dragging your blade from its scabbard, the metal dull in the dim light. Your hand recoils at first touch. Cold bites harder from steel than from stone. The quirky tidbit surfaces. Some soldiers tucked smaller weapons under their cloaks, or even beneath bedding to keep them warm. Daggers pressed against ribs, axes resting by thighs, swords laid carefully under blankets. It wasn't just for readiness against sudden attack, it was so that in the morning the grip wouldn't rip the skin off your fingers. There are even tales of desperate men urinating on sword hilts before battle to thaw them enough for handling. Not dignified, perhaps, but necessity has little regard for dignity. Historians still argue whether such improvisations were common practice or colourful exaggeration. Some sources emphasize the discipline of knights, polished armour gleaming despite the season, while others stress the reality of rusted mail and frost-stuck weapons. Perhaps it depended on rank. Wealthier men with squires could maintain gear properly, while lowly garrisons managed with spit and rags. The evidence is scattered, leaving us to imagine cold mornings filled with the sound of scraping metal and muttered curses. You drag the cloth along your blade, the motion rhythmic, almost soothing. The steel glints faintly, though your breath fogs against it, frosting the surface as quickly as you wipe. You sigh, shaking your head. The battle is endless against cold, against damp, against time itself. You rub harder, determined not to let your weapon betray you when it matters most. Your senses sharpen. The smell of tallow fills your nose, thick and fatty, clinging to your cloak. The texture of the rag rasps against steel, rough on your fingertips. Every stroke produces a faint ring, a whisper of metal waking from sleep. You stare at the blade, remembering times it seemed invincible, only to learn that nature itself could reduce it to uselessness. A comrade beside you lifts his helmet with both hands, wincing as he tests the rim. "Cold enough to bite a man's ears clean off," he mutters, setting it near the brazier. The iron hisses faintly as warmth touches it. You nod, imagining the misery of a watch shift with a frozen helmet pressing against your skull. Another soldier chuckles darkly, pulling a dagger from beneath his tunic. "Kept mine close all night," he says, rubbing it dry. "Almost took a rib for it, but at least it didn't freeze." The others laugh weakly. Humor is thin, but it keeps you human. You think about the strange paradox of weapons in winter. They are symbols of power, yet in the wrong conditions they become liabilities. A sword can protect you, but only if you can grip it. A spear can strike, but only if the shaft doesn't snap from frost. You begin to wonder if the true enemy of castles was less siege and more season. Your mind drifts to stories of winter campaigns. Chroniclers describe knights stumbling into battle with numb hands, dropping lances before the charge even began. Some mention blades shattering in the cold, as though the iron itself had grown brittle with frost. Are these tales exaggerations, cautionary fables told by weary scribes? Or are they truths too uncomfortable to admit that steel is no match for nature's indifference? Historians still debate, but standing here, cloth in hand, you lean toward the latter. The hours pass slowly as you tend to your gear. Each man does the same, polishing, oiling, muttering, as though participating in a strange ritual. The fire crackles, smoke curling upward, shadows dancing along the walls. The sound of scraping steel becomes a kind of chant, steady, relentless, reminding you that survival is not just about keeping the body alive, but also keeping the tools of war ready. Eventually, you sheath your sword, satisfied it will not betray you tonight. You tug your cloak tighter, shifting closer to the brazier. The warmth kisses your face, but your hands still sting, raw from cloth and frost. You flex your fingers slowly, imagining them stiffening around a weapon in some future battle, unwilling to let go. A comrade leans over and smirks. "Better to lose a finger than lose your grip," he says. You grimace, knowing he's right. In war, dignity is often negotiable, but your hold on your blade never is. You lie back on your straw that night, sword tucked close at your side, not just for protection but for warmth. You laugh quietly at the absurdity embracing steel as though it were a lover, but you know the truth. Survival makes bedfellows of all things. As your eyes grow heavy, you feel the weapon's cold presence by your thigh, and you whisper a thought into the dark. "Stay with me. Don't freeze when I need you most." You wake stiff again, though this time your bones ache less from cold and more from the endless grind of duty. The straw pokes at your skin, your cloak smells of smoke, and your sword lies heavy by your side. Another night survived, another day to stumble through. But the captain calls, and the routine continues. Today the men gather in the courtyard not to eat or polish weapons, but to drill. At first, the idea seems absurd. The air is biting, your fingers stiff, your muscles sluggish. Who would train in this kind of weather? But as you line up with your comrades, wooden practice poles clutched in hand, you understand. It isn't only about discipline, it's about keeping warm. Records from the period leave little doubt. Commanders often ordered drills, even in the harshest winters. Some sources describe troops practicing sword forms, spear thrusts, or archery on icy mornings, not because an attack was expected that hour, but because the movement itself kept men alive. A chronicler once noted wryly that soldiers marched to chase death from their bones, a phrase that captures the strange duality of training in winter. It was preparation for war, yes, but it was also exercise in survival. Your feet slap against the frozen ground as you and your fellows begin marching in formation. Step, turn, step again, the rhythm beats heat into your body, each movement a small victory against the frost. Your breath rises in great clouds, merging with those around you until the courtyard looks like a steaming cauldron of men. An unusual anecdote from northern garrisons tells of soldiers treating drill like dance in the dead of winter. They stamped, clapped, and shouted in rhythm, turning practice into something halfway between exercise and celebration. Outsiders might have thought them mad, but the result was undeniable. Laughter, sweat, and warmth, even when snow piled against the gates. Still, there's disagreement among modern experts. Some argue that winter drills were primarily symbolic, meant to maintain morale and remind soldiers of discipline, not actually to generate warmth. Others counter that exercise was essential for circulation, especially for men stationed in bleak, exposed castles. Perhaps both are true. Standing here, spear in hand, you sense that symbolism and practicality are not mutually exclusive. Movement saves the body, discipline saves the soul. The sensory world of the drill unfolds sharply around you. The crack of wooden staves colliding rings through the courtyard. Boots thud in unison, echoing against stone walls. The smell of sweat rises quickly despite the cold, pungent and almost comforting. A reminder that the body is alive, resisting. You taste copper in your mouth as your breath quickens, lungs burning from air colder than the water in a well. The captain barks orders, voice rough but steady. Again, higher, faster. He isn't just teaching technique, he's forcing your heart to pump, your muscles to ignite, your skin to flush. You hate him in the moment, but you know you'll thank him when night comes and your body still hums with heat from the day's exertion. One soldier near you mutters a joke. "At least if we drop dead, we'll be limber." Laughter ripples through the line, weak but real. Humor, even crude, is another form of warmth. As the drill intensifies, you feel a strange shift. The cold is still there, pressing against you, but it's muted by the fire rising from within. Your cloak flaps as you pivot. Sweat beads along your brow despite the icy air, and for the first time in days you feel strong rather than brittle. You realize the paradox. Battle practice, which should drain you, actually restores you. The hours pass in a blur of movement, the courtyard alive with clattering poles, shouted commands, and the rhythm of boots. When at last the captain calls an end, the men collapse onto benches, cloaks thrown open, steam rising from their bodies like they've been baked rather than frozen. You lean back, chest heaving, feeling almost human again. Later, when you return to your straw pallet, the afterglow remains. Your muscles ache, but pleasantly so. You can still feel the warmth thrumming in your veins, a stubborn resistance against the cold that waits outside. You realize that tomorrow it will fade, and the night will reclaim its grip. But for now, you've stolen a few hours of comfort from the winter's claws. And so you sleep more easily, grateful for drills that seemed pointless at first but proved to be quiet salvation. In a castle built for war, sometimes the fight is not with an enemy but with the season itself, and the battlefield is your own body. The warmth from the day's drills fades by evening, and once again the cold claims its throne. You rub your hands together, flexing stiff fingers, only to notice the angry red patches across your knuckles. They sting when you bend them, burn when you press them, and yet feel strangely numb when left alone. You frown, because you've seen what happens if the cold wins this battle. Frostbite. Men whisper about it in the barracks, half with fear, half with bravado. The blackened toes, the flesh that peels, the digits lost one by one, until a man can no longer grip a spear or march in line. You glance around the chamber now, noticing others doing the same as you, rubbing hands, stamping feet, blowing into cupped palms. It's a shared ritual of defiance against the creeping frost. Evidence from medieval chronicles makes clear that frostbite, though not always named as such, haunted soldiers who stood guard in harsh climates. Monks writing in northern Europe noted, "Men whose fingers fell as wax from a candle." In military accounts, descriptions of soldiers unfit for service after winter campaigns appear frequently. The condition was poorly understood, but its symptoms were unmistakable: numbness, discoloration, and loss. Castles might protect men from arrows, but not from the winter itself. You watch one of your comrades unwrapping a strip of cloth from his feet. His toes are pale, almost grey, and he grimaces as he rubs them vigorously. Another soldier dabs a concoction of goose fat onto his hands, massaging it in, as though praying the oil might keep the cold from chewing deeper. Oddly enough, some remedies were downright bizarre. In certain regions, soldiers smeared their extremities with onion juice or vinegar, believing the sting kept the flesh alive. Others carried charms, tiny relics, or blessed coins pressed against their skin under wrappings, convinced divine protection would keep frostbite away. One curious tale tells of men urinating on their own hands to warm them before handling weapons, a method equal parts practical and humiliating. Debate continues among historians as to how effective these treatments really were. Some argue that animal fats provided a genuine barrier, reducing moisture loss and insulating against frost. Others suggest these practices were mostly ritual, offering psychological comfort more than physical cure. What is certain is that the cold did not care. It took whomever it pleased, regardless of ointment or charm. The sensory details etch themselves into you. The sharp smell of goose grease fills the chamber, mingling with the earthy scent of damp wool. The sound of men rubbing, slapping, muttering curses forms a strange chorus, more desperate than disciplined. You run your hands down your calves, feeling the pins and needles return as blood reluctantly stirs. Your lips crack when you smile grimly because even pain is better than nothing. The captain wanders through, his eyes hard. He scolds a man for sitting still too long. "Move or lose them," he growls, pointing at the soldier's toes. Everyone knows what he means. No one wants to be the man limping behind, bandaged stumps wrapped in dirty linen. A comrade leans toward you and mutters, "They say frostbite spirits take what they like. Fingers, toes, ears. Best to trick them by wrapping extra cloth, so they choose someone else." You chuckle weakly, because superstition can sometimes feel more believable than science. In the dark, who's to say the frost isn't alive? You think about how fragile the body is, and how stubborn. Even as flesh blackens, men keep walking, keep fighting. You've seen them return from watch duty, faces pale, ears red raw, yet still they shoulder their weapons. Perhaps it isn't courage. Perhaps it's simply the refusal to let winter declare victory. That night, lying on your pallet, you rub your hands again and again, refusing to let them grow still. You tuck them under your armpits, feel the pulse beat faintly in your wrists, and whisper a silent plea, "Stay with me." Around you, men do the same, each guarding his own body as fiercely as he would a castle wall. And so the night passes, filled with restless movements, ointments, charms, and whispered prayers. No one sleeps deeply. Everyone knows the truth. The enemy at the gate is patient, invisible, and merciless. Its name is frostbite, and it takes what it pleases. The morning comes bleak and pale, sunlight spilling weakly across the battlements, as though even the sun cannot muster strength in winter. You sit up on your pallet, wriggling your toes inside boots that feel stiff as boards. Every joint aches, every step crackles against straw, and still the day demands you rise. The cold is worst at the extremities, always the hands, always the feet. If your fingers fall victim to frostbite, at least you can tie them up and swing a weapon with the other. But if your feet give out, you're useless. Medieval soldiers knew this truth intimately. Written accounts from garrison logs mention that foot care was an obsession, especially during harsh winters. Without steady feet, no soldier could climb ladders, march across icy fields, or stand guard through endless hours. Shoes and boots were fashioned of leather, often lined with wool, though rarely waterproof. The trick was not to keep them dry, that was nearly impossible, but to keep them warm enough to avoid losing toes before spring. You tug your boots off, and the smell hits immediately. Damp leather, sour wool, the acrid tang of sweat fermented overnight. You grimace, but this is the price of survival. Your hose are moist, the wool clinging unpleasantly to your calves. Beside you, another soldier unwinds strips of cloth from his ankles, his feet red and swollen, though still mercifully whole. He mutters curses, rubbing them fiercely, as if anger alone might restore life to his limbs. A curious practice often mentioned in lesser-known sources is the wrapping of feet in extra rags or foot cloths. Soldiers who lacked proper socks layered spare strips of linen or wool around their toes, creating a kind of bandage against the cold. Some stuffed straw or moss into boots as insulation, a trick borrowed from peasants and hunters. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, turning boots into crude furnaces for a few hours. You try it yourself, pushing bits of hay into the toes of your shoes, ignoring the itch. Modern researchers disagree on how effective such measures truly were. Some insist that wool and moss gave significant insulation, citing archaeological finds of preserved footwear stuffed with plant fibers. Others argue that the dampness and pests these materials invited may have caused as many problems as they solved. Did soldiers benefit more from warmth or suffer more from sores? The evidence doesn't give a neat answer. The sensory assault is undeniable, though. You wiggle your toes against the prickly straw, the scratch leaving red marks but also trapping heat. The leather boots creak as you pull them back on, stiff from yesterday's frost, and you stomp them against the floor, trying to soften them into obedience. The sound echoes in the chamber, joined by the rhythmic pounding of other soldiers doing the same. It's like a drumbeat, a defiant march against the winter's rule. One man nearby mutters, "Better blisters than black toes." Another grins, tugging his second pair of hose over the first, boasting he'll be warmest of all. You smile faintly at their banter. knowing humor is as necessary as wool. Some accounts even tell of men sleeping with their boots still on, unwilling to expose their feet to the air. You shudder at the thought, imagine the smell, the filth, but perhaps they weren't wrong. Every minute without warmth was a gamble. Even nobles, with better boots lined in fur, sometimes wrapped their legs in spare pelts at night, refusing to take chances. The captain inspects the garrison that morning, barking reminders, "Keep your feet dry, keep them wrapped, keep moving." His voice is harsh, but beneath it lies a strange tenderness. He knows what frost can do. He's seen too many men hobble into spring maimed for life, never marching again. He knows a soldier without feet is no soldier at all. As you stomp your boots into submission, you feel the warmth build slowly, blood stirring with each strike. The sensation is both pain and relief, the pins and needles of life clawing its way back. You wince, then laugh softly, because it means you're still alive. You glance toward the doorway, where snow drifts against the threshold. Another long night is coming, but for now you've bought yourself a little more time. Feet wrapped, boots stuffed, rags tied, you've armed yourself for battle against the frost. And as you shoulder your cloak and step back into the courtyard, the thought lingers. Swords and spears may win wars, but socks humble, scratchy, woolen socks win winters. The day drags on, grey and uneventful, until the smell of wood smoke and bread pulls you toward the heart of the castle, the kitchens. You follow your nose like a hound, down winding passages and through a door where warmth spills into the corridor like sunlight breaking into shadow. The moment you step inside, the world changes. The air is thick with heat from ovens and open hearths, a stark contrast to the icy draughts of the barracks. You inhale deeply, and for the first time in days, your lungs don't ache. The castle kitchen is alive. Flames roar under iron cauldrons. Cooks bark orders. Spits creak as meat turns slowly, fat dripping into the fire with a hiss that fills the room with savory smoke. The rush of heat hits your face, so intense you almost forget it's winter. Soldiers not on duty linger near the ovens, pretending to help but mostly loitering, soaking in warmth like lizards basking on a rock. Accounts from the period describe kitchens as the warmest rooms in castles, second only to the great hall hearths. But unlike the hall, the kitchen heat was constant, fed all day long to prepare meals for hundreds of mouths. Ovens baked bread daily, cauldrons simmered, fires never rested. For lowly soldiers, sneaking into the kitchen was both a practical and political act, a chance to survive the night a little more comfortably, provided the cooks looked the other way. You ease closer to an oven, holding out your hands until they tingle with sudden life. The stone is warm against your back when you lean on it, a luxury you haven't felt since summer. You sigh audibly, earning a grin from another soldier doing the same. The warmth seeps into your bones, unspooling the knots in your muscles, dulling the ache in your joints. For a moment, you could almost fall asleep standing there. Here's one of those odd little details that survive in records. Some soldiers bribed kitchen workers with scraps of coin or favors just for a chance to sleep in the corner overnight. A spot near the oven, even on bare stone, was worth its weight in gold when frost turned straw pallets into icy slabs. In fact, there are tales of disputes breaking out over who had the privilege of sleeping closest to the ovens, some ending in fistfights, others in laughter, depending on the mood and the wine. Of course, historians remain divided on how common this practice truly was. Some argue kitchens were jealously guarded by cooks who resented soldiers encroaching on their domain. Others suggest lords themselves turned a blind eye, recognizing that warm soldiers meant fewer sickbeds to fill. It's one of those uncertainties where truth likely varied from castle to castle. But standing here, feeling heat chase away frostbite, you're inclined to believe that men always found a way to sneak near the fire, rules or no rules. The sensory feast overwhelms you. The crackle of firewood, the hiss of dripping fat, the rhythmic thud of knives on wooden boards all mingle into a strange music, comforting and alive. The smell is intoxicating. fresh bread crust turning golden, onions sizzling in butter, meat roasting until the air itself feels edible. Your empty stomach growls, but even if you don't eat a morsel, the heat alone nourishes you. A comrade leans near the oven, cheeks flushed, and mutters, "Better than a feather bed." You nod, knowing he's right. You'd trade half your pay for a night in this room. One curious custom among soldiers was heating stones in the kitchen ovens before night watch. Wrapped in cloth, these stones were carried under cloaks or slipped into bedding, radiating warmth for hours. You've tried it once, clutching a heated brick to your chest while trudging the wall walk, and though your fingers still froze, your heart felt shielded. It's a trick worth repeating, if you can steal the chance. You glance at the cooks, busy and distracted, and wonder if you could linger longer without being chased off. But even if they shout, even if they swing ladles, you take the scolding gladly. Every extra moment near this fire feels like stolen treasure. As evening deepens, the soldiers drift reluctantly back to their chambers, grumbling at the thought of returning to straw and drafts. You stay a moment longer, memorizing the sensation. Heat pressing against your face, smoke curling into your hair, the scent of bread and roasting meat clinging to your cloak. You know that when you lie down tonight, shivering again, this memory will comfort you almost as much as the real fire did. Because in winter castles, warmth is never just warmth. It is survival, morale, and hope all baked into the brick of an oven, all hidden in the glow of a kitchen hearth. The kitchen heat lingers on your skin long after you leave it behind, but when you return to the barracks, reality reminds you of its hierarchy. Not everyone fights the cold on equal terms. The lord and his officers sleep differently than the rank and file. You, with your straw mattress and itchy cloak, are grateful simply for the chance to warm your feet. But above, in the smaller chambers tucked into the keep's heart, the officers rest in feather beds. It's one of those established truths that filters through every chronicle. Men of status slept softer. Inventories from castles list bolsters of down, quilts lined with fur, and mattresses of feathers. While common soldiers wrapped themselves in wool, the elite had beds that cushioned, insulated, and most importantly kept them raised from the icy ground. Feathers trapped warmth far better than straw, and furs layered on top gave a softness almost unimaginable when you're lying on a lumpy sack that smells of mildew. You've never lain in a feather bed, but you've heard enough from those who have to picture it. They say you sink into it like a bird's nest, enveloped in warmth that cradles rather than scratches. No straw pokes your skin, no fleas scuttle across your neck, no dampness seeps up from stone, just softness, warmth, and silence. You can't help but envy the officers who will close their eyes tonight in such comfort. An odd little detail mentioned in household accounts is that some noble beds were so large and stuffed so full they required multiple servants to fluff them nightly. Imagine the absurdity of men laboring simply to prepare a cushion while others down below rubbed frost from their toes. For soldiers, such luxury seemed like myth, a story exaggerated for amusement. Yet inventories confirm it was real. Of course, scholars remain split on how common these feather beds truly were. Did every officer have one, or only the lord and his closest companions? Some evidence suggests minor garrisons made do with wool-filled mattresses, while only great castles boasted down and fur. Regardless, the gulf between the ranks was visible in bedding as much as in armor. A man's station could be measured by how softly he slept. You roll onto your straw and feel the sharp prick of stalks against your shoulder blades. The contrast is cruel. Around you, men shift restlessly, scratching at bites, muttering curses, their beds more prison than refuge. You think of the feather beds above and wonder if those men even remember what it's like to lie here, wrapped in the stink of mold and sweat. Your senses betray you with the fantasy, the imagined rustle of feathers beneath your weight, the warmth cocooning you, the gentle scent of linen washed in herbs. You picture yourself lying there, the world softened, the cold nothing but a memory. It's almost enough to make you smile, though the reality pokes at your ribs and reminds you where you belong. One comrade chuckles bitterly. They'll be snoring like babes in nests tonight, he says, pulling his cloak tighter. And us? We're the geese that lost the feathers. The men laugh, hollow but honest. Humour, once again, is survival. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Castles are built to display power, and even in sleep the division is clear. Soft for the few, hard for the many. Perhaps it's necessary. Perhaps it's simply unfair. You can't decide. What you do know is that men who sleep on feathers wake stronger, march longer, and complain less. Comfort is a kind of armor too, one you'll never wear. You close your eyes, straw prickling, and try not to think of what lies above. But the image persists, vivid and taunting. Feather beds piled high, tapestries blocking drafts, fires burning low, officers curling into warmth while you and your comrades gnaw through another night of straw, smoke, and frost. And as sleep finally claims you, you whisper to yourself, maybe in another life. The bells from the chapel toll faintly through the stone, each note muffled by snow piling against the walls outside. You stir from your straw mattress, stiff and weary, and feel the silence settle back down after the last echo fades. Religion is never far from a soldier's mind in winter. When the body fails, when cloaks and fires and salted meat are not enough, men turn to prayer. It is well attested in monastic chronicles that soldiers stationed in castles often clung to rituals for comfort, especially through long, cold nights. Services in the chapel were shorter in winter, but more fervent. Psalms were whispered with chapped lips, and candles burned on the altar, even when fuel was scarce. The act of prayer warmed more than the spirit. It gathered men in a place with light, with sound, with company. Loneliness, as much as frost, was the killer, and religion gave shape to endurance. You pull your cloak tight and slip into the chapel now, where a few others kneel. The air is still frigid, your breath still fogs, but the flicker of votive candles and the rhythm of chant make you feel less raw. The stone floor numbs your knees, yet you welcome the pain it distracts you from the ache in your bones. Curiously, some soldiers adapted the prayers themselves as rituals of warmth. Accounts survive of men tracing crosses not just on their foreheads, but on their boots and gloves, as if to bless their extremities against frostbite. Others whispered charms that blurred the line between religion and superstition, calling on saints to warm their blood, or reciting verses while rubbing hands together. Odd as it sounds, the repetition itself created heat, however modest. There is disagreement among historians about how much genuine faith was involved. Some scholars argue these rituals were deeply spiritual, a soldier's plea for divine protection. Others suggest they were practical psychology, a way of giving shape to fear, to turn desperation into ritual. Perhaps both are true. When you kneel in the dim chapel, you sense that faith and survival need not be separated. They are woven together, each sustaining the other. The sensory world of the chapel is different from the barracks or the hall. You hear the low murmur of voices, the crackle of candles fighting against drafts, the hollow echo of breath against vaulted stone. The smell of beeswax mixes with damp wool and the faint must of old prayer books. Your fingertips trace the rough grain of a wooden pew, splinters catching at your skin, grounding you in the physical even as your lips move in prayer. One soldier beside you whispers fiercely, eyes closed, "Saint Martin, warm my feet as you once gave half your cloak to a beggar." Another clutches a rosary so tight the beads press indentations into his palm. You watch, silent, and wonder if the saints truly hear, if heaven spares a glance for men shivering behind stone walls. But then you notice something subtle. The act of praying itself makes you warmer. Not physically, not in any measurable way, but in the way your shoulders unclench, your heartbeat steadies, your mind loosens its grip on despair. The cold still presses, but it feels less personal, less like a predator stalking you. For a moment, you feel sheltered. It's easy to scoff at such rituals in hindsight. Some modern writers dismiss them as superstition, a distraction from real solutions like cloaks and braziers. Yet in the stillness of this chapel, you realize the truth. The mind is part of survival. Belief, whether in saints, charms, or rituals, keeps you from surrendering. And in a winter fortress, surrender of spirit is the first step toward death of body. You bow your head, murmuring words you half believe, half hope into existence. The candles sputter, wax pooling on the altar, their flames no stronger than the ones you shielded on the wall walk days ago. But they burn, and that alone feels miraculous. When the prayers end, the men linger, reluctant to leave. They know the cold waits outside. Eventually, though, the chapel empties, and you step into the corridor again, cloak drawn tight. The draught greets you immediately, gnawing at your cheeks, but the echo of the chant remains in your ears, steadying you. You smile faintly, cracked lips stinging, and whisper under your breath, "Amen." The chapel's echo still lingers in your ears when you return to the barracks. The chants fade, replaced by the groans and mutters of soldiers readying for another frigid night. Yet something has shifted. After prayer, after invoking saints and lighting candles, the talk around the pallets turns to charms, amulets, and stranger things. It is a well-documented truth that medieval men, even those steeped in Christian ritual, carried old superstitions like extra layers of clothing. In castles, soldiers pinned bits of bone or herbs into their cloaks, muttered incantations, or wore talismans strung on cords beneath their tunics. Faith in relics and charms was not separate from religion, it coexisted, part desperation, part tradition. If a scrap of parchment with a saint's name written on it might keep your fingers attached through February, why not believe? You sit cross-legged on your pallet as one comrade pulls a small pouch from his belt. He opens it reverently, revealing dried rosemary and sage. "Keeps the frost spirits away," he claims, tossing a pinch into the brazier. The herbs crackle and release a sharp, fragrant smoke that overpowers the usual stench of damp wool. Others nod solemnly, as if the smell alone drives away the cold. A curious practice mentioned in lesser chronicles describes soldiers sewing tiny metal crosses into the hems of their cloaks, so no draught could sneak in without meeting holy resistance. Others tied scraps of wolf fur around their wrists, convinced that the beast's strength passed into them. There are even tales of men carrying the knucklebones of animals in their pockets, shaking them like dice to rattle the frost away. It sounds strange, even comical, but when your flesh aches from numbness, you cling to anything that promises help. Scholars disagree on whether these charms were widespread or isolated quirks. Some argue they were common among rank-and-file soldiers, many of whom came from rural villages steeped in folk belief. Others suggest they were rare, mocked by the more devout, tolerated only in silence. The records are fragmentary, but one thing is certain: superstition has always thrived where suffering is constant. The sensory detail is vivid in the barracks tonight. You smell the sharp tang of burning herbs, feel the smoke sting your eyes. You hear the rustle of cloth as men adjust amulets hidden beneath layers, the clink of coins or charms tied to leather cords. A soldier across from you mutters under his breath, words you don't quite catch, half prayer, half spell, while rubbing his hands briskly as if the words themselves generate heat. You run your fingers along the inside of your cloak, where a small wooden token dangles. It's nothing more than a carved disc with a crude sun etched on one side, given to you by a villager before you left for garrison duty. You've never put much faith in it, but tonight you clutch it tighter than usual. The wood is warm from your body, smooth from months of handling, and in your mind you hear the villager's voice. The sun never leaves you. It's silly, you tell yourself. Yet as your teeth chatter less, you wonder if belief itself warms you. One soldier laughs, breaking the mood. He holds up a rabbit's foot, dangling it for all to see. "Here's my protection," he says with a grin. The others groan, some amused, others irritated. "Best roast it for supper," someone retorts, but the laughter, thin as it is, lifts the atmosphere. Even ridicule is part of survival. It acknowledges the absurd, makes it lighter to carry. And yet there's a darker side. You've heard whispers of soldiers who believed curses followed them in winter. A cracked sword, a torn boot, a persistent cough, all were blamed on failing to wear a charm or losing an amulet. Some men spiraled into despair when their trinkets broke or disappeared. Faith can comfort, but it can also consume. Still, you cannot deny the collective effect. The barracks feels warmer tonight, not because the brazier burns any brighter, but because the men cling to hope together. The air is thick with stories of saints who walked barefoot in snow, of charms that glowed when frost approached, of lucky tokens passed from father to son. You listen, half skeptical, half eager, because stories themselves are insulation. They fill the empty hours, ward off the loneliness, and make the cold seem a little less absolute. As you lie back, tokens still in your hand, you think of the line between prayer and superstition, between religion and magic. Perhaps the line doesn't matter. Perhaps survival is not about truth, but about what keeps you alive long enough to see the thaw. Your eyes close, smoke still stinging them, and the last thing you smell is rosemary fading into the draught. Somewhere outside, snow falls silently on the battlements. Inside, you dream of charms glowing against the dark, their warmth as real as fire. Snow drifts high against the outer walls by the next evening, piled in heaps like dunes of white sand. The air is so sharp that each breath feels like swallowing needles. You tramp across the courtyard, boots crunching, and see a small group of soldiers doing something curious. They are digging into the snow itself, carving out a hollow with helmets and bare hands. At first you laugh, surely they've gone mad. But when you crouch closer, you realize the truth. They're making shelter. It may sound counterintuitive, yet there are scattered references in medieval accounts suggesting soldiers used snow as insulation. Chronicles of campaigns in northern Europe describe men burrowing into drifts when wood for huts was scarce. Even without scientific understanding, they knew instinctively that a pocket inside snow could trap body heat better than lying exposed to the wind. Snow caves or shallow pits lined with cloaks gave a surprising reprieve from the icy air. You crawl inside one of the hollows after the others beckon you. The world changes instantly. The wind muffles. Silence wraps around you like a heavy curtain. And though the floor is still cold, the air no longer bites your face. You blink in amazement, realizing that the snow once enemy now feels like ally. The men grin at your expression. One mutters, "A bed of frost to keep the frost away." Odd little anecdotes confirm this practice. Some soldiers even lined the insides of their snow shelters with straw or moss scavenged from barns, turning them into crude igloos. Others set small braziers at the entrances, careful not to melt the roof, but enough to warm the air slightly. The ingenuity may have seemed absurd to outsiders, yet to those inside, it was clever necessity. Historians remain divided on how common such snow shelters were. Some argue they were desperate measures used only during campaigns in the far north or on mountain passes. Others believe they may have been more widespread, adapted wherever supplies of wood and fuel ran low. The truth is hazy, but tonight, crouched in a hollow that muffles the storm's howl, you no longer doubt it. The sensory shift inside the snow cave is startling. You hear your own breath loud in your ears, every exhale fogging into the close air. The snow walls glow faintly in the torchlight, blue and silver, as though you've crawled into the belly of the moon. The smell is sharp and clean, nothing but frozen air, a contrast to the smoky barracks. Your fingers trace the icy walls, smooth and solid, and you marvel that something so cold can also shield you. A comrade beside you chuckles. Feels like a grave, doesn't it? But at least it's warmer than the wall. The others laugh nervously, because he isn't entirely wrong. The hollow is tomb-like, close and silent, but the warmth of bodies inside makes it feel less like death, and more like a strange kind of rebirth. You sit shoulder to shoulder with the men, cloaks overlapping, boots pressed against boots. The snow presses in from every side, yet instead of crushing, it protects. You realize the paradox. What kills you in the open can preserve you in the hollow. Nature itself offers both enemy and ally, depending on how you approach it. One soldier mutters a superstition. Snow remembers who lies in it. Treat it kindly, and it will cradle you. Curse it, and it will bury you. You shiver not just from the cold, but from the eerie poetry of the thought. You stroke the wall gently, half mocking, half serious, and whisper, "Be kind, then." There are downsides, of course. The damp creeps into your hose, and your boots feel wetter by the hour. You shift uncomfortably, knowing you'll pay for it later. Yet compared to the icy wind outside, the damp is tolerable. You find yourself dozing, lulled by the muffled silence, the steady breathing of your companions, and the faint glow of snow walls shimmering like stained glass. Later, when you crawl back into the barracks, men scoff at your story. Sleeping in snow? Madness, they declare. But when they see the calm in your face, the ease in your movements, some glance at the drifts outside with new suspicion. Perhaps tomorrow, more will try it. And as you curl onto your straw pallet, you think about the lessons snow taught you. Survival is not always about fighting the elements. Sometimes it is about listening, adapting, and letting the cold itself become your shelter. The barracks feels tighter than usual the next night, packed with bodies and stifled coughs. You're half asleep on your straw pallet when a soldier stumbles in, boots caked with snow, cloak crusted stiff, and an odd expression on his face. He isn't alone, he leads a horse by the bridle, coaxing the beast into the chamber with gentle words. The men groan and laugh, but no one sends him away. Everyone knows why he's doing it. Horses are more than transport in winter. They are furnaces with hooves. Their great bodies radiate heat. Their breath steams into the cold air, and their hides, when pressed close, feel warmer than any cloak. Chronicles from medieval campaigns mention soldiers bedding down beside horses during bitter nights, especially when caught outside the walls. In castles, though rarer, desperate garrisons sometimes allowed animals into chambers to share warmth. It was messy, smelly, and hardly dignified, but so was freezing to death. You shuffle closer, curiosity outweighing hesitation. The horse shifts nervously at first, hooves clattering against stone, but soon lowers its head, resigned to the strange company. The soldier who brought it kneels, stroking its neck, then lies down beside its flank, pulling his cloak over himself like a blanket. The sight is absurd and touching at once. A man tucked against an animal as though it were his bedfellow. There are odd stories about this practice. One tale describes soldiers in mountain passes literally crawling under their horses, pressed against the belly for warmth while snow buried them both. Another speaks of knights resting their heads against their steeds' necks, whispering prayers to Saint Eligius, patron of horses, as though asking the animals to share not just heat but endurance. These may sound exaggerated, but the principle is sound. Few things in winter radiate life, like a living creature. Experts today don't fully agree on how widespread this was. Some suggest it was common only among cavalry, who treated horses as both partners and tools. Others insist it was a last resort, frowned upon in castles but tolerated in emergencies. Either way, the smell of dung and hay in the chamber tonight leaves little doubt. When the frost threatened fingers and toes, men set pride aside and curled against beasts. The sensory flood is immediate. You smell the sharp, earthy musk of horse sweat, mingling with the smoke from the brazier and the sour scent of wool. You hear the steady snort of breath from flared nostrils, the shifting of hooves against stone, the low rumble of the animal's stomach. You press your hand to its flank, and the heat astonishes you, steady, pulsing, a warmth no blanket could replicate. You ease yourself down beside the soldier, uncertain at first, but soon you feel the comfort seep into you. The horse twitches an ear, unimpressed, then settles. You rest your cheek against its side, coarse hair scratching your skin, but you don't care. The warmth spreads across your face, down your neck, into your chest. It feels alive, and in that moment you could almost believe the animal knows what it's giving you. A comrade cracks a joke, careful you don't start snoring in time with it. Laughter ripples, thin but real. The tension eases, And for a little while the cold doesn't seem so overwhelming. You imagine the barracks full of men curled around animals, a strange menagerie of survival. Perhaps it wasn't common, but it's easy to picture in the darkest months. Yet there is something humbling about it. Castles are symbols of human power, walls, towers, moats, all built to defy nature and enemy alike. But when winter bares its teeth, men huddle against beasts like children. Pride dissolves in the face of necessity. You close your eyes and think, the horse doesn't care about rank, about war, about survival strategies. It simply lives, breathes, and warms. Maybe that's why it comforts you so much. As you drift towards sleep, you hear the rhythm of its heartbeat under your ear, steady as a drum. It's slower than yours, stronger, grounding. Outside, snow lashes against the walls. Wind moans through arrow slits, and frost creeps across stone. But here, pressed against the side of an animal, you feel shielded. Perhaps tomorrow the horse will be led back to the stables, its warmth replaced by straw and cloaks. Perhaps the captain will scold the soldier for dragging it in. But tonight, you rest with a living furnace beside you, and for once, you believe you'll wake with all your fingers and toes intact. By morning, the warmth of the horse has faded, leaving only the smell of manure and a faint ache in your back from sleeping pressed against its flank. You're grateful nonetheless, every finger and toe still wiggles when you test them. But a new problem awaits, one that never takes a holiday, not even for frost. Nature's call. You sigh heavily when the need hits, because the thought of leaving your pallet, braving the icy corridors, and trudging to the latrine is torture in itself. The castle's garderobes, those protruding stone chambers jutting over moats or cesspits, are as unforgiving as the battlements. In summer, they reek. In winter, they freeze. The seat is nothing more than a slab of stone or wood with a hole cut through it. And tonight, the thought of baring skin to that frozen surface makes you shudder. Castle records and archaeological digs confirm the simple truth. Latrines were functional but brutal. Waste dropped directly into pits or waterways below, carrying the stink far and wide. In freezing weather, the waste could congeal, creating icy stalagmites that made use even more unpleasant. Soldiers joked darkly that one could freeze to the seat and have to be chipped loose. It wasn't far from the truth. One of your comrades mutters a trick passed down through garrisons, warming a stone near the fire, then placing it briefly on the seat before use. It's a clever idea, though risky if the stone cracks or scorches the wood. Another swears by squatting in the straw of the stables instead, claiming the smell there is no worse, and the animals don't judge. You laugh, but the thought tempts you all the same. Travel accounts tell of stranger customs. Some soldiers carried chamber pots into corners of the barracks during bitter nights, preferring the stink indoors to the frost outside. Others leaned over walls, hastily relieving themselves into snowdrifts. There's even one curious record of a commander fining men caught fouling the courtyard, though in truth, punishment was often overlooked when frostbite loomed larger than discipline. Modern historians are not united on the question of how tolerable these conditions were. Some argue soldiers simply accepted latrine duty as one more hardship of garrison life. Others highlight that chronic diarrhea, dysentery, and infections must have worsened in freezing months when men avoided the garderobes entirely and improvised indoors. The truth is likely both stoic acceptance mixed with grim improvisation. The sensory experience is unforgettable. You make the trek to the latrine tonight, cloak wrapped tight, torch in hand. The air is brittle, snapping at your lungs as you breathe. Snow crunches underfoot until you reach the small tower that houses the garderobe. The smell hits you first, rancid, sour, rising even through the frost. Then the chill, the seat icy against your thighs, so shocking you gasp aloud. Your skin prickles, burns, then goes numb all within seconds. You clench your jaw, finish quickly, and leap up as though the stone itself has bitten you. Returning to the barracks, you hear laughter from a group who knew exactly where you went. Lose anything? One asks, grinning. You roll your eyes but join their humor. In a castle winter, embarrassment is a small price compared to frostbite. Superstition even touched this corner of life. Some men swore that relieving oneself facing east kept illness away. Others claimed spitting into the cesspit appeased spirits who guarded against frost. Silly or not, such habits gave men the illusion of control, and when the body feels most vulnerable, even ritual has power. Back on your straw, you wrap your cloak tighter and mutter that tomorrow you'll try the stable trick instead. Anything to avoid that stone seat again. The castle may protect you from enemy swords, but from the nightly indignities of winter, it offers little mercy. The days pass, and though your fingers and toes remain intact, not every soldier is so lucky. Winter does not simply gnaw at skin, it seeps into lungs, bones, and bellies. Soon you notice the barracks filled not only with shivering but with coughing. At first, it's a background noise. A hack here, a sniff there. But within a week the sound is constant, echoing through the chamber like a grim drumbeat. Chroniclers of the Middle Ages often remark that winter garrisons lost as many men to illness as to battle. The cold, weakened bodies already malnourished by thin rations, leaving soldiers vulnerable to fevers, chest infections, and what they simply called the ague. Modern readers might call it pneumonia, bronchitis, or influenza. Whatever the name, it struck hard when men huddled together in damp chambers where air grew foul and smoke from braziers stung the lungs. You lie on your pallet, pulling your cloak tighter, listening to the symphony of misery, hacking coughs, wheezing breaths, groans muffled under wool. A soldier 2 beds away spits into the straw, muttering a curse. Another lies shivering despite 3 blankets, his forehead slick with sweat even as his lips turn pale. The stench of sickness blends with smoke and damp hay, cloying and sour. You press your cloak to your nose, though it doesn't help much. Oddly enough, some remedies border on the bizarre. Soldiers rubbed garlic onto their chests, hoping the pungent oil would drive away sickness. Others chewed mustard seeds or drank hot ale laced with honey and vinegar, calling it a cure for chills. One tale even mentions men sleeping with onions tucked into their boots, convinced the vegetable would pull fever downward and out through the soles. Whether such tricks worked or not, they gave hope when medicine was scarce. Medical historians remain divided on how effective these practices were. Some argue the honeyed ale, at least, offered soothing warmth and hydration. Others dismiss most remedies as ritual at best, harmful at worst. What is clear is that in the confines of a castle winter, sickness spread like wildfire. Shared bedding, shared bowls, shared breath, every attempt at survival also carried disease. You hear the physician shuffle in, a man more feared than respected. His satchel clinks with vials of herbs, his cloak reeks of vinegar. He peers at the sick soldier's tongue, mutters about imbalanced humours, and prescribes bleeding. You grimace as the man unsheathes a small blade, nicking a vein to drain blood into a bowl. The patient groans, too weak to protest. You wonder if he'll survive the cure. The sounds of illness dominate the night. Coughs echo through the rafters, a wet, rattling chorus that never seems to end. Men shift restlessly, covering their heads with cloaks, as if fabric alone can muffle contagion. You lie awake, every tickle in your throat making you panic. Is it just dryness, or the beginning of something worse? The fear of sickness gnaws almost as much as the cold itself. Superstitions rise in response. One soldier burns sprigs of juniper over the brazier, filling the air with acrid smoke, declaring it wards off plague. Another swears by tying a scrap of red cloth around his wrist, claiming the colour fools death into passing him by. You roll your eyes, yet part of you envies their certainty. Belief can be a shield when medicine fails. The sensory memory of this night will stay with you. The heat of the brazier battling the chill draught, the stink of sweat and herbs mingling, the sound of laboured breathing filling every pause. You press your hands over your ears, but it's no use. Illness doesn't stop. By dawn, one man's pallet is empty. He has been carried quietly to the chapel, wrapped in cloth. another victim of the cold's hidden weapon. The barracks falls silent for a moment. Then life resumes, boots stamp, cloaks are pulled tighter, drills continue. But the coughs remain, echoing as a reminder that the true siege isn't always outside the walls. Sometimes it's inside, creeping from pallet to pallet, invisible but merciless. You exhale slowly, whispering to yourself, "Don't let it take me." The cold may claim your fingers, the hunger your strength, but sickness? That's the thief you fear most in this frozen fortress. The coughing fades into the background as you stumble out into the courtyard again, desperate for fresh air, even if that air bites like knives. The castle itself seems to groan under the strain of winter. Every stone is rimed with frost, every tower draped in icicles, every corner alive with draughts. And as you pace the walls, you realize how much the very design of the fortress works against warmth. Castles were never meant for comfort. Records and architectural surveys make that clear. They were machines of defense stone piled thick, towers raised high, corridors narrowed and angled to funnel invaders. Their walls kept out enemies, yes, but they also kept in dampness. Arrow slits let archers fire, but they also let winds howl straight into chambers. High vaulted ceilings looked impressive but bled heat upward, leaving men shivering below. In summer, these features were tolerable, even useful. In winter, they turned castles into refrigerators. You pause beneath an arrow slit now, and the wind whistles through it, carrying snowflakes that sting your cheek. You curse softly. Who designed such features clearly wasn't the one standing guard in January. The slit frames the outside world beautifully, a perfect line of white field and grey sky, but its real effect is funneling icy draughts directly into the hall. There are scattered notes from the time that hint at attempts to soften these flaws. Some lords ordered shutters of wood or leather, hung across slits in winter. Others hung heavy tapestries across walls, less for beauty than for insulation. In wealthier castles, entire chambers were lined with wood panelling to reduce the stone's chill. But for soldiers, especially those quartered in communal rooms, such luxuries were rare. An odd little practice mentioned in travel diaries describes men stuffing rags or even animal skins into cracks between stones to block draughts. Some swore by piling spare shields against walls, turning them into makeshift barriers. It might look ridiculous, defenses turned into insulation, but when the alternative was frost gnawing your marrow, pride mattered little. Modern researchers disagree on whether castle interiors were truly unbearable or merely uncomfortable. Some argue that with fireplaces, braziers, and clever hangings, many rooms could be made tolerably warm. Others insist the sheer thickness of stone and poor ventilation doomed most spaces to perpetual damp chill. The truth likely depended on resources, wealth, and the stubbornness of the men enduring it. The sensory experience is undeniable, though. You walk the great hall now, and though the hearth blazes at one end, your breath still fogs in the air halfway across the chamber. The stone floor leaches warmth straight through your boots, and each step echoes like you're treading through a tomb. Draughts curl around your legs, invisible serpents coiling up from hidden cracks. The fire's roar is distant, no match for the cavernous space. A comrade gestures upward at the high ceiling. Heat rises. We freeze, he mutters bitterly. You nod, because you feel it too, the warmth lifting out of reach, leaving you trapped in the cold shadow below. Still, you can't help but marvel at the paradox. These walls, designed to protect, become tormentors in winter. The same slit that deflects arrows now drives icy wind against your back. The same towers meant to inspire awe now echo like hollow drums when gales rush through them. You realize castles were built to survive sieges, not seasons. You think of the peasants in their low cottages, smoke curling from thatched roofs, rooms small enough to warm with a single fire. They suffer poverty, hunger, disease, but perhaps they do not shiver as much as you in your lord's grand fortress. You chuckle dryly at the irony. The great stone marvels of the age may last centuries, but on a January night, you'd trade it all for a peasant's hearth. As dusk falls, the castle grows even colder, stone storing the day's frost instead of releasing it. You tug your cloak tighter, step back into the barracks, and hear the wind whistling through the arrow slits above like ghostly flutes. You mutter to yourself, half in jest, half in resignation, the castle fights enemies without and soldiers within. And as you settle onto straw once more, you think that perhaps the true genius of survival is not the engineering of the fortress, but the endurance of the men who live in it. The walls may be unforgiving, but the men inside are not powerless. Tonight, when the hearth smoke curls lazily in the hall and the brazier glows only faintly, you notice soldiers moving about with purpose. They are dragging thick cloths from storage, shaking dust from woven hangings, and hauling them toward the barrack walls. It takes you a moment to realize what's happening. They are hanging tapestries. It's well recorded in estate inventories that castles were often draped in wall hangings, not just for show but for survival. Tapestries were more than decoration. They acted like medieval insulation, trapping warm air and blocking drafts that slipped through cracks in the masonry. Lords commissioned vast, intricate works of art for great halls, but even rougher woolen cloths were pressed into service in humbler rooms. Soldiers, lacking the luxury of embroidered scenes of hunts or saints, sometimes hung coarse blankets or even spare cloaks across the walls, anything to put a barrier between flesh and stone. You take one edge of the cloth yourself, pressing it against the wall while another soldier hammers in a wooden peg. The fabric billows as the wind sneaks through cracks, but when secured, the draft lessens. The difference is immediate. The room no longer breathes frost straight into your bones. A curious note found in some household accounts mentions that herbs were sometimes stitched into the seams of hangings, lavender, wormwood, rosemary, not only to scent the room, but to deter insects nesting in the cloth. Imagine that, a wall both fragrant and practical. You can almost picture a noble chamber glowing with colour and sweet air while below, soldiers make do with whatever ragged cloths they can find. Experts disagree on just how effective these hangings were. Some argue they made a tangible difference, especially when combined with braziers and low ceilings in smaller chambers. Others caution that they offered only psychological comfort, a barrier that tricked men into feeling protected from drafts while the temperature barely changed. You press your hand to the fabric now and feel less wind, more stillness. Whether illusion or reality, it comforts you. The sensory atmosphere shifts in the barracks as the hangings go up. The sound of the wind dulls, no longer shrieking through cracks but muted like a distant whistle. The scent of old wool fills the room, musky and earthy, with faint hints of smoke clinging to every fold. The sight of the fabric softens the harsh stone, turning the chamber from a prison into something resembling a home. Even the acoustics change. Voices sound warmer, less hollow, bouncing gently off cloth instead of echoing from bare walls. One soldier grins, running his hand across the rough weave. Feels like living in a lord's hall, he jokes. The others chuckle, though the cloth is nothing grand. Still, the act itself lifts morale. For once, they are not merely enduring the cold, they are fighting it with ingenuity. You think of the great halls of lords, where tapestries stretched from ceiling to floor, scenes of battles or romances woven in vibrant dyes. Those hangings were power displays as much as insulation. Yet in their own way, these ragged blankets serve the same purpose. They declare that men refuse to bow entirely to the season. As night falls, the difference is striking. The barracks feels closer, warmer, less exposed. You lie on your straw, cloak wrapped tight, and for the first time in weeks, the draft doesn't creep directly across your face. It isn't luxury, but it is relief. Superstitions creep in too. One soldier insists that hangings trap not only heat but spirits, that ghosts drifting through castles hate to pass through cloth. Another scoffs, but then mutters that he sleeps easier knowing something stands between him and the stone. Whether keeping out frost or phantoms, the fabric earns its place. You drift off listening to the softer soundscape, no shrieking wind, just muted murmurs, and the occasional crackle of the brazier. Your fingers brush the tapestry beside your pallet. rough against skin, and you smile faintly. Who knew that a scrap of cloth, no matter how plain, could feel like armor? And as you close your eyes, you realize the truth. In a fortress built to defy armies, survival sometimes comes down to the humblest defenses: blankets on stone, cloth against cold, and men who refuse to give in. The hangings do their work, muting the wind, softening the cold, but another enemy remains. Even in a room draped with cloth and warmed by braziers, the castle floor is merciless. Every step across the flagstones seems to draw the warmth out of your bones, and when you lie down, the chill creeps upward from beneath like a thief. Tonight, the men are determined to fight back in their own way, layering the floor. Inventories and excavations alike reveal that rushes, straw, or even reed mats were spread across castle floors, changed seasonally when possible. The practice wasn't just for cleanliness, though. Clean is a generous word. It was also a form of insulation. A scattering of dried plant matter softened the stone, trapped heat, and in theory, absorbed some of the filth of daily life. For noble halls, the rushes might be mixed with herbs like lavender or meadowsweet to sweeten the air. In barracks, soldiers settled for whatever could be gathered: straw from stables, reeds from riverbanks, even coarse brushwood. You watch as men drag armfuls of straw into the chamber, spreading it with their boots until the grey stone disappears under a golden carpet. The sound is immediate rustling, crackling, a chorus of whispers underfoot. You grab a bundle yourself, scattering it by your pallet, feeling a strange sense of triumph as the prickly stalks create a barrier between you and the stone. Odd references in letters and chronicles suggest soldiers sometimes competed over who had the thickest bedding of straw. Some even claimed that piling herbs into the rushes kept lice at bay, though others joked it simply made the vermin smell nicer. A particularly eccentric detail appears in one French account: men sprinkling wine across rushes to quell foul airs. Imagine wasting precious drink on the floor. Still, desperation breeds creativity. Scholars continue to debate how effective rush-strewn floors truly were. Some argue the insulation was minimal, with cold still radiating upward. Others note that in layers thick enough, the plant matter provided genuine comfort, akin to a rustic carpet. Archaeological finds of compacted rush layers several inches thick support the idea that, at least in well-supplied castles, floors could be cushioned and warm enough to make a difference. The sensory transformation tonight is undeniable. The rushes rustle with each movement, filling the room with the earthy scent of fields. You breathe deeply and almost imagine yourself outdoors in summer, lying in hay under the sun. The illusion comforts you, even as snow pounds the walls outside. The prickliness against your palms is irritating, but better than the icy sting of bare stone. One soldier drops onto his pallet with a satisfied groan. "Feels like sleeping in a meadow," he declares. Another smirks, scratching at his ankle. A meadow full of fleas. Laughter ripples through the barracks, and for a moment, the cold feels far away. You settle onto your own pallet, pressing your cheek into the straw-strewn floor. The warmth isn't overwhelming, but it is real. Your body doesn't tense as much against the creeping chill. Even your breath feels steadier, less ragged. You marvel at how something so simple, so humble, can change the way a night passes. Superstitions attach themselves even here. One man insists that scattering herbs among the rushes wards off illness, that rosemary on the floor makes lungs stronger. Another mutters that straw absorbs evil dreams, trapping them like snares so they can't crawl into sleepers' minds. The barracks is full of such murmurs, half mocking, half sincere. You close your eyes, smile faintly, and decide that whether they're true or not, you'll believe them for tonight. As the fire burns low, the rushes continue their quiet work. They soften sound, muffle steps, and turn the hard barracks into something less hostile. You curl tighter into your cloak, feeling the straw rustle beneath you, and let yourself drift into sleep. Because in a winter fortress, survival is not always about swords or shields. Sometimes it's about grass underfoot, carried in by weary men who refuse to let the stone win. The rushes soften the cold floor, the tapestries mute the draughts, and still the nights stretch endlessly. Winter in a castle is not only a battle with frost and hunger, it is a war against boredom. A man can endure cold for a while, hunger for a while, but despair seeps faster than any draught. Tonight, when the braziers glow faintly and supper is long gone, someone pulls out a lute, another hums, then a third joins with a drum made from a barrel. Soon the barracks is alive with sound. Chroniclers often note that music and storytelling were staples of garrison life, particularly in harsh months. Records from castles across Europe describe minstrels hired to entertain lords, but soldiers entertained themselves with rougher tunes. Songs ranged from bawdy ballads about taverns to half-serious chants invoking saints to bring spring faster. Storytelling filled the gaps when instruments were scarce. Men recited tales of battles, of heroes, or of strange folk legends carried from their villages. The words themselves were warmth, a shield against the silence of stone. You sit back on your pallet now, letting the sound wash over you. The lute strings are rough, buzzing faintly out of tune, but the melody still carries. A soldier stamps his boots in rhythm, straw crackling beneath him, and others clap or sing along. The air feels lighter, the barracks brighter, as though the walls themselves lean closer to listen. An amusing custom mentioned in letters of the time was the improvisation of verses mocking officers or rival garrisons. Men sang of captains with noses red as berries, of lords who snored louder than trumpets. The humour was sharp, sometimes biting, but laughter forgave it. For a few minutes, rank dissolved. Everyone was simply a voice in the choir of survival. Scholars continue to argue about the role of such pastimes. Some claim they were frivolous, distractions with no real impact. Others insist they were essential, keeping morale high and preventing mutiny. The truth likely lies in both. A joke or song did not cure frostbite, but it gave men the will to face another night. And sometimes willpower mattered more than boots or cloaks. The sensory world of the barracks transforms under music. Instead of coughing and mutters, you hear laughter, rhythm, voices rising and falling. The flicker of torchlight casts dancing shadows across the walls, turning bare stone into a stage. The smell of sweat and smoke is still there, but now it feels less oppressive, carried on the rhythm of clapping hands. You find yourself smiling despite the ache in your bones. A comrade beside you launches into a tale half true, half imagined about a knight who fought a frost demon with nothing but a ladle from the kitchen. The men roar with laughter, some pretending to swing spoons like swords. Another follows with a story about a woman who warmed entire armies with a single pot of broth, her cauldron said to never empty, no matter how many soldiers drank. These are not histories, but they are truths of a kind. Warmth, laughter, and companionship can feel miraculous. You notice something else. The act of telling, of singing, is itself a physical exercise. Voices rise, lungs expand, blood flows faster. You clap your hands till your palms sting, stamp your boots till your calves burn. Without realizing it, the barracks has become a furnace not from firewood, but from joy and motion. Superstitions linger here too. Some men claim certain songs chase away evil spirits that creep into castles on winter nights. Others say stories told aloud become charms, protecting the listeners from nightmares. You don't know if any of it is true, but you know this: no one feels alone when voices echo together. As the night deepens, the music slows, voices soften. A final ballad drifts across the room, mournful but gentle, like a lullaby. Men lie down one by one, still humming as they settle into straw. You close your eyes, the melody still in your ears, carrying you toward dreams warmer than any blanket. And you think, as sleep claims you, swords guard walls, but songs guard hearts. Without them, winter would win. With them, you might endure until spring. The song from last night still echoes faintly in your head when you wake, the melody clinging like smoke. But now a different sound fills the hall, the scratching of quills. A handful of soldiers sit hunched near the brazier, parchment spread across their knees, tongues peeking from cracked lips as they labor over letters. You watch quietly, realizing that warmth does not only come from fires, straw, or cloaks. It comes from words too, from reaching across distance to those who cannot be here. Castle inventories and surviving documents show that letters were a lifeline for garrisons. Though many common soldiers were illiterate, some could scrawl their names or dictate words to a more educated comrade. Families received reports of health, requests for supplies, or simply the reassurance, I am alive, still breathing, still fighting the cold. And in return, letters from home carried comfort far stronger than broth. A scrap of parchment, a few lines in a familiar hand, could warm a man more than a brazier ever could. You borrow a quill and sit awkwardly, scratching your thoughts onto the page. Your hand cramps in the cold, ink thickening as it freezes in the pot. But you persist. You write of the cold, of the drills, of the way straw creaks beneath you at night. You mention the prayers in the chapel, the laughter after songs. And then, quietly, you write the words that matter most. I miss you. I endure this because of you. The letters blur as your eyes sting, and you blame the smoke. Oddly enough, some soldiers tucked bits of their environment into their letters. Pressed herbs, snippets of cloth, even flakes of straw. Archaeologists have found traces still wedged in ancient envelopes. They were tokens of survival, proof that this is what my world looks like. Imagine a wife or child far away touching that straw, smelling faint smoke, and feeling the cold second hand. The letter was more than words. It was a bridge across winter. There is no consensus among historians about how often these letters actually reached their destinations. Some argue castle couriers were reliable, carrying messages through snow and siege. Others suggest most letters were lost, stolen, or simply abandoned in saddlebags when war moved faster than messengers. Yet even the act of writing mattered. Whether delivered or not, it gave shape to longing, turned loneliness into sentences. It allowed men to believe they were still connected to a wider world. The sensory act of writing is sharp tonight. The quill scratches like a small animal against parchment. The ink smells metallic, sharp against your nose. The brazier pops as wood shifts, smoke curling over your page. You blow on the ink to dry it, lips cracked, the taste of salt still on your tongue. Around you, other men sigh, mutter, or laugh as they compose their own words. One soldier dictates clumsily to a comrade, asking him to write to his wife that he still has all his fingers and teeth. The room chuckles softly. When the letters are folded, sealed with blobs of wax, or simply tied with twine, a strange calm settles over the barracks. Each man touches his letter like a talisman. They may not know if it will reach its destination, but the thought that someone out there might read it makes the stone walls feel less like a tomb. You tuck your own letter beneath your cloak, waiting for the next courier to depart. The paper feels fragile against your chest, yet also powerful. You imagine the hands that might hold it, the eyes that might scan its lines. That image alone fills you with warmth greater than the fire. Before sleep, a comrade reads aloud from a letter he received months ago. The ink is faded, the paper creased, but his face glows as he repeats the words. The men listen quietly, even reverently. It feels as though the voice of his wife is speaking through him, filling the room with a presence beyond stone and frost. You lie back, the straw rustling, letter pressed against your heart, and think, winter may isolate the body, but words cross any distance. And sometimes, that imagined closeness is enough to make you believe spring will come. The letter you tucked beneath your cloak still rests against your chest when the next evening arrives. It has not yet left with the courier, but simply knowing it exists has steadied you. Tonight, however, a different kind of comfort fills the hall, one that does not need ink or parchment. It comes in the form of a man with a lute, another with a battered drum, and a third who begins to juggle 3 apples pilfered from the kitchen. Entertainment. Accounts from medieval garrisons often note that, when nights stretched long and cold, Men created amusements to stave off despair. Minstrels hired by lords entertained the upper chambers, but in the barracks the soldiers entertained themselves. Music, juggling, dice games, riddles, even crude plays were performed on straw-strewn floors. The aim was not sophistication, it was survival through distraction. You watch as the juggling soldier fumbles, drops an apple, and curses loudly. Laughter ripples through the room, warmer than any brazier. Another man strums the lute, strings buzzing, and begins a bawdy ballad about a tavern girl who tricked half a regiment into paying her for prayers. The tune is rough, but the rhythm is strong, and soon men clap along, stamping boots against straw. The floor becomes a drum, the walls a chorus. Travelers' tales mention that some soldiers even mimicked noble entertainments. They staged mock tournaments inside halls, using broom handles as lances and cloaks as banners. Others acted out farces, playing lords and ladies in exaggerated voices until the entire room howled with laughter. One curious anecdote describes soldiers painting faces on turnips, then staging puppet shows about demons frozen in hell. The details may sound absurd, but in a castle winter, absurdity itself was warmth. Historians remain divided on whether such diversions were encouraged or tolerated. Some suggest commanders approved, seeing that laughter kept morale intact. Others believe officers frowned on frivolity, preferring silence and discipline. Perhaps both are true, depending on who stood watch at the door. Tonight, though, no captain interrupts, and the barracks fills with joy. The sensory atmosphere is striking. You hear the lute twang, the drum thud, the applause echoing from stone. You smell roasted apples tossed back to the juggler after his act, their sweetness briefly masking the usual musk of straw and sweat. Torchlight flickers across grinning faces, making the rough walls seem almost golden. Even the cold seems held at bay by laughter's fire. One soldier, emboldened, stands to tell a story. His voice rises, dramatic, as he recounts a battle against frost giants, imaginary foes, of course. He swings his arms wildly, describing swords shattering into icicles, horses galloping across frozen clouds. The men cheer and boo in equal measure, but no one feels the chill while the tale unfolds. Superstitions entwine with entertainment too. Some men believe that laughter itself wards off illness, that demons of frost retreat from joy. Others whisper that telling stories of warmth summer fields, taverns, hearths, invites those spirits back into the room. Whether truth or not, the belief itself becomes fuel. You find yourself laughing harder than you have in weeks, belly aching, cheeks hot. The sound surprises you, almost foreign after so many nights of shivering silence. You realize that warmth does not always come from cloaks or braziers. Sometimes it comes from the body remembering it is alive, that it can still laugh, still sing, still dance even when frost presses from every side. As the night deepens, the energy softens. The lute slows into a gentle tune, men humming as they lie back onto pallets. One soldier juggles the last apple only once before biting into it with exaggerated relish. The room sighs with contentment, and for the first time in weeks, silence feels peaceful rather than oppressive. You curl into your cloak, eyes heavy, the echoes of song and laughter lingering like embers in the air. The castle outside remains frozen, stone unforgiving, wind unrelenting. But inside, tonight, you carry warmth not in your cloak or belly, but in your heart. And you think, as you drift toward sleep, firewood burns out, straw rots, cloaks tear, but laughter endures. And it may be the strongest fuel of all. The laughter of the previous night carries into the next day, but the cold is never far away. By evening, the barracks once again groans under the weight of frost. The tapestries hold back some of the draught, the rushes blunt the stone's bite, and the brazier glows faintly. Yet men still shiver, huddled into cloaks. And then someone proposes the oldest, simplest tactic of all: share the heat of one another. It is well attested in both chronicles and modern analyses that communal sleeping was a crucial survival method, not only for lack of space but for warmth. Men crowded together, pressed shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, like animals in a den. In garrisons, this was no accident, it was strategy. The warmth of bodies kept the room alive through nights when frost would otherwise seize fingers and toes. You shift onto your pallet, and two comrades immediately shuffle closer, wordless, practiced. Soon a third presses against your other side. The arrangement is awkward, limbs tangled, cloaks overlapping, but within minutes you feel heat pooling between you, spreading slowly across skin. It isn't comfort in the noble sense, there is still the stink of sweat, the prick of straw, the rasp of snores, but it is survival. Contemporary sources even record soldiers creating sleeping orders, rotating positions, so no one man always took the outside where drafts struck hardest. Others describe men joking that they married their bunkmates in winter, bound together until spring freed them. Such crude humor masked desperation, but it also lightened the act of huddling so close. Some researchers argue that this practice bonded men in ways discipline alone could not. Shared warmth built trust, broke down barriers of rank, and reminded soldiers they endured together. Others counter that it was purely pragmatic, born of necessity, with no deeper significance. Perhaps both are true. You know only this. Tonight, as your body soaks in the warmth of strangers, you feel less alone. The sensory details are sharp. You smell wool, damp with sweat and smoke, hear the rasp of breath sinking into rhythm, feel elbows jabbing ribs as men shift in search of comfort. Yet beneath the irritation lies a strange peace, the reassurance of bodies refusing to surrender. The cold can gnaw, but it cannot break through this knot of flesh and cloth. Superstitions weave into the practice too. One soldier mutters that sleeping close confuses the frost spirits, making them unable to choose a victim. Another insists that dreams travel between men lying together, carrying protection from one to the next. Whether you believe it or not, the murmurs ease the fear. As the night deepens, you drift into half-sleep, lulled by the rhythm of shared breathing. Outside, the wind lashes the towers, snow hammers the gates, and the stone walls crackle with frost. But inside this cocoon of bodies, warmth holds. And then, slowly, the scene fades, not just tonight's, but all the nights before. You remember the hearth fire's glow in the great hall, the greasy tallow candles guttering in the wind, the desperate tricks with salted meat and hot ale. You recall drills that turned sweat into fleeting warmth, prayers whispered to saints, charms sewn into cloaks, snow hollows carved with helmets, even the horse that shared its heat. You see again the rushes on the floor, the tapestries on the walls, the music and the laughter, the letters pressed against chests like hidden fires. Each fragment is a piece of the larger truth. Survival in a castle's winter was never a single act, but 1,000 small ones, layered together like cloaks upon cloaks. No trick alone was enough. Only persistence, only the stubborn will to endure, carried men through the season's cruelty. You lie still, body pressed against comrades, and let the weight of that truth settle. Medieval soldiers did not survive winter because their castles were warm, they survived because they refused to let cold claim them. Every brazier lit, every cloak wrapped, every laugh shared, every prayer whispered was an act of defiance. The brazier's glow dwindles to embers, straw rustles faintly, and sleep overtakes you. The night outside remains merciless, but inside you drift toward dreams warmed by memory and companionship. Now, let the noise soften. Imagine the castle fading into silence. The drills, the coughs, the laughter, they blur into stillness. Only the slow crackle of a dying fire remains, embers glowing faintly in the dark. You feel the heat on your cheek, but it no longer burns. It's gentle, like a whisper. Picture yourself lying not on straw, not in a drafty hall, but somewhere safe. The stone walls have dissolved into mist. The icy draughts are gone. Around you, the weight of wool and fur holds steady, comforting. You hear breathing steady, calm, not desperate but relaxed. Companions are near, but no longer restless. They too are drifting, carried by warmth that needs no firewood, no oil, no tricks of survival. Your body, once tense against cold, softens now. Fingers uncurl, shoulders release. The ache in your bones dissolves like frost in sunlight. You feel suspended between wakefulness and sleep, floating in the hush of history. Think of the soldiers who endured, who laughed in the face of frost, who huddled together under cloaks, who whispered prayers to saints and tucked charms against their skin. They endured, and because they did, their stories reached you. You carry them now, but lightly like a cloak across your shoulders, no longer heavy, just protective. Let your breath deepen. Inhale slow and steady, exhale softer still. The winter storm beyond the walls is quiet now. You are safe, you are warm, you are at rest. Close your eyes, let the final embers fade. Drift gently into sleep, with the memory of the castle behind you and the promise of spring ahead.